Hey, sovereign wealth builders, Simon Dixon here, and welcome to another episode of Simon Dixon Hard Talk Live. It is becoming more and more obvious what is happening here and what this Iran war was all about. And guess what? You will own nothing and be happy. Allow me to make the case, and I'm going to be going through everything that's happened this week in the Iran war and how it relates to you and what you need to do to protect yourself, both from a technical aspect, both from a macro aspect, and also from a geopolitical aspect. So we've been covering week one and week two of the Iran war from the perspective of how it impacts you so that we can forecast ahead and you can become more sovereign at the end of it by understanding and following the money rather than following the headlines so you don't get caught with your pants down when they're trying to take away your sovereign freedom using and weaponizing the proof of weapons network that weaponizes both the war, financial weapons of mass destruction, and technology in order to usher in this multipolar world as well as a global technocratic 1984 programmable money nightmare. So let's jump right in. The title of this week's episode is Iran War Week 3. The settlement phase begins. I'm going to make the case while people think that this is escalating to World War III and that there is no solution and this will go on for a long time. The financial markets and the maths tell me it can't go on for a long time without creating massive demand destruction. And so I'm going to make the case why I think the settlement phase has begun and what we saw this week that makes me believe that is true. And remember, the overarching theme, you will own nothing and be happy. I want you to have that in the back of your mind as we go through this. We're going to do this as usual in two parts. In part one, I'm going to go through Iran War Week 3. And this is going to be essentially the financial industrial complex settlement phase, I'm calling this. What are the early indications that there's going to be a settlement and what it actually means for you, while everybody else is predicting World War III, massive escalation? I believe that this is managed chaos and it has a very specific purpose. And we're going to find out in the weeks ahead. In part two, I'm going to be going through a interview that Peter McCormack did with me. The last one got over almost 600,000 views, and it was the top 5 videos in 10 years of podcasting for Peter McCormack. And so he asked me to come back, and while I was traveling, I'm on the move rather than at the studio at the moment. I thought I'd pop by and do a second follow-up interview. The title of that is Weaponizing the Iran War. You will own nothing and be happy. So I'll go deeper into, the actual implications from both a spiritual perspective and individual perspective, and the desired psychological impacts this is meant to have. And that's my second interview with Peter McCormack. I'd really appreciate you if you could go over also to Peter McCormack's channel, get it some views as well, because we'd love to get that a top 5 again, like last time. So without further ado, let's jump straight into part one. Iran War Week 3, the financial industrial complex settlement phase. Right. So let's recap what we've covered previously as well. Now, what I want you to do is suspend disbelief while you're watching this. Everyone has opinions around what happens. It's based upon their experience, how they translate this, where they were brought up, and you will have a data bank of information based upon lies and propaganda that you will believe around this war. Now, whether you believe that this is, an Iran-Contra affair, which we've covered many times. I'm not going to cover that again. But an Iran-Contra affair style coordination, where effectively there was declassified CIA documents from the 1980s, where Iran, Israel, and US were working together. And I've always made the case that that relationship has led to, trillions of dollars of money being printed in strategic tension like Operation Gladio, where you fund stay-at-home militia armies in order to create tension so that you can extract resources and you can justify the forever war model. I've covered that many times in previous episode, but you don't need to believe that to get the same conclusion. Maybe you just believe that this is pure geopolitics, there's no coordination, and this is just absolute chaos. And then the corporate interest, the military industrial complex, the financial industrial complex, and the technical industrial complex will weaponize and take advantage of the chaos. You can believe whatever you want. I use my model of following the money that gives indications that these things are understood before they happen. But either model, whatever you want to believe, it doesn't really matter because the outcome will be the same. So there's something here for everybody. The one, you know, the basically this crisis will either, be weaponized by power or it was engineered by power in the first place. But what was the desired end goal? I've always said that this war will be a theatrical war like the 12-day war. And last week, in the weeks ahead, I said, wow, this is accelerated and there are resistance factions, but the end result will be the same, that the financial industrial complex has an agreed, a defined outcome, strategic goals, and there are things that go wrong, there are hedges, there are adjustments, but I still believe that this is a coordinated. Now, I also define theater. Theater doesn't mean the deaths aren't real, the weapons aren't real, the war isn't real. There are factions of power that are fighting real wars, but at the very, very top layers, there is a level of coordination with which spans across all jurisdictions, all world leaders that represent transnational capital. And they have a defined outcome, and nothing stops that train. And if they need to adjust, then there is adjustments. But the idea is that this will accelerate what covered last week in week two, the global reset. This is a shift to a multipolar world while there is a global technocratic, control grid that's being set up, depending on which part of the world you live in. And the agenda is that you will own nothing and be happy. This is defined in the World Economic Forum, Davos conferences, where world leaders, project their interpretation of the world and people adjust to that. Now, that's just one faction of business power. I've covered this whole proof of weapons network many times, and that there are transnational capital that's represented by the financial industrial complex. Then there are the technical industrial complex and the military industrial complex. I won't go into those today. We'll do a quick recap in the interview for those that are new to this. But what you need to understand is that they work in three phases, and a war, a crisis, always goes through the same phases. As we said, it could either be coordinated, which I believe it to be, or it could be that they just take advantage of it, whichever you want to believe. Phase one is where the military industrial complex profits from war, destruction, the selling of weapons, leveling down infrastructure and building infrastructure, so that it can be effectively built back better. And when it is built back better, it is built in a different way to serve an agenda for phase two, the financial industrial complex. So once you wage these wars, you get to extract all of the resources, you get to profit from the demolition, and you get to lay the field for the rebuild phase. And in phase two, that's when the financial industrial complex that provided the financing as well as government budgets and the bond markets provided the financing. Obviously, the bond markets is issued by the financial industrial complex through government debt. The people end up with the debt, but the debt needs to be rolled over because fiat currencies are structured as debt. And so in the end, you strip out all the assets until more and more is owned by a few, and you become a product, a collateralized debt obligation. You're locked in through mortgages, credit card debt, your wages don't outperform inflation. And so you have this transfer of wealth in a K-shaped economy that ends in what's happening now: fiscal dominance, extreme popularism, the manufacturing of civil unrest in order to weaponize profit, building the surveillance state. But anyway, phase two is where the financial industrial complex. That's where I believe we are in right now in week two and week three of the Iran war. This is basically renegotiation of all contracts in line with a once in a century, once in a lifetime shift of the world order. And that is the global reset that I covered in both week one and week two last week. So this is where you take all the energy contracts and you renegotiate them. You'll see the word force majeure a lot. You'll also need to follow the money and understand the flow and what it means, because where energy flows, control follows. So whoever controls the energy and the energy routes, control follows. And then you have to look at the ownership structure of that energy. Is it nationalized energy, as it is with the Gulf countries or as it is with Russia? Or is it privatized energy, as it is with Chevron and Exxon, and various other companies and BP and Shell in the West? Or is it energy dependency while building infrastructure like it is with China? So those three things determine who controls the flow. So, for example, in the West, because all of the private energy companies are private, then they make up a part of the private sector interest of the financial industrial complex. If a country like the Gulf has their own sovereign wealth fund, then it is nationalized interest that's utilized in order to negotiate leverage and join the financial industrial complex, but remain a degree of sovereignty. If you are required to manufacture, as China is, or maybe India and various other manufacturing bases, then you get to control the input functions of the financial industrial complex too. So the manufacturing base is like the base layer, and then the ownership structure determines who gets to influence that, but they have to be subordinate to the manufacturing base. And then finally, those that have privatized, securitized, and financialized all their energy, they are controlled by private corporate interests, as is the case in the West. And so governments become subordinate to private corporate interest. Effectively, you take all of these energy contracts and you load countries up with debt that are on the wrong side of that cycle. You create new trade routes by waging wars and resetting the maps. And you create new supply chain dependencies by choking certain strategic points and renegotiating contracts, insurance contracts, trade routes, financial dependencies, bonds, bailouts, all those types of things. But basically, you're renegotiating everything and repricing everything. And by using this mechanism of a debt-based Ponzi scheme, where there's not enough debt to pay all the money, the currency is debt, then you have to always have this wealth extraction K-shaped economy. That means that right now you hit a phase where the wealthy are effectively doing all the consumption. In the case of the US, the top 10 wealthy are responsible for 50% of the consumption, and the rest are consuming on debt, which is makes the bank wealthier as well. And so debt creates this dependency. And so repricing always disproportionately benefits the wealthy that control the assets, and they end up controlling more assets and turning more countries, companies, and individuals into collateralized debt obligations where you effectively become the product. Um, but this is basically a settlement phase. The pre-negotiated world order had already been set up. I've always talked about how Trump was installed, and Liberation Day was to liberate the world from the dollar, in order to, in recognition that China, with the manufacturing base, and America, hollowed out through financialization and securitization, had already lost the trade war. And Trump was the one that needed to deconstruct everything that backed up the dollar to remove the world reserve currency for the financial industrial complex, who are managing flows in a multipolar world while making sure they can extract as much assets out of the West. And then you need crisis in order to create these global resets and then renegotiate everything. Now, when I was predicting another 12-day war, remember I said initially that Trump would be installed in order to go to war with Iran. Then, as the trade war and the tariffs happened, I thought we could transition without a trade without the war. Then I predicted that maybe we don't need the war, but we had the 12-day war. Then I said this will be a theatrical three-way victory negotiated outcome that moves to the next phase of negotiation. The next phase of negotiation happened, and then I said there will be the final transitionary war. I thought it would look very similar to the 12-day war, but it looks like it's been a lot more aggressive in order to turn what could have taken years into a very, very condensed, short time frame. That's when you have this destruction for the rebuild phase. And so in phase three, we hand over to, the financial industrial complex benefits throughout the whole way through. But in phase three, we hand over to the technical industrial complex. That's the next phase. That's when essentially you have manufactured scarcity that leads to energy constraints and a need for you to use technology in order to change your behaviors, change your spending patterns, and provide all the data that is needed for this data-driven 1984 Orwellian nightmare where effectively the control grids are built. So everything is rebuilt with technology. By making housing unaffordable, suddenly Tesla comes along with a $7,000 affordable house, which is fully electric, fully controlled grid. Suddenly Tesla changes its strategy from you will own cars to we will build, automated replacements for Uber and cab drivers, and you will effectively rent your cars, but you'll give us data in every movement. X becomes a platform for freedom of speech, but not freedom of reach. And then you provide all of the algorithm to build your social credit score. Money becomes programmable through stable coins or countries that can get away with central bank digital currencies. One is controlled by the financial banks. The other is private controlled and through the central banking and the Fed system transfers power to the private sector interest. And of course, everything done through artificial intelligence so that you can control the narrative as well. And you can replace humans with AI and robotics. Eventually, that moves to a universal basic income where it's pitched to you as a utopia where you don't need to work. But in the end, you're in your home on technology. And I've always talked about how to resist against that and remain sovereign at the same time as utilizing that because nothing stops this train. Opting out is not really an option, but you do need to prepare for it so that you've got your sovereign wealth building at the same time. You need to be an asset owner rather than an asset to the bank, which is somebody that takes on all the debt. But anyway, this is where you get energy refactoring, force majeure contracts, lock in at higher prices, subordination of countries that don't have energy infrastructure, carbon credit scores, ESG, refactoring, destruction of manufacturing bases, hollowing out of infrastructure. And you even can have lockdown style demand, centers. So we've already, seen that the IEA, the Energy Association, International Energy Association, I think it is, they've already suggested to save energy, stay at home. And so you can have more aggressive policies. The thing to realize right now is even if the Strait opens today, nothing stops the impact. I've been giving 10-minute market updates all this week. They're on my YouTube channel. Make sure you watch them. Each day I go through the financial aspects of that have been happening. And I publish them all on my blog on simondixon.com. Here is what's already set up. There are 3,200 shipments that break all supply chains in the Strait of Hormuz. This is guaranteed inflation. Energy prices go up. We've already seen the producer price index in US from February data came in hot at 3.4%. That has a delayed effect on consumer price inflation index, sorry. So the CPI comes 3 months later. Then we had the Fed meeting this week. He said, no, we're not changing rates. Inflation is transitory narrative. And then you have to hike rates to deal with the inflation. But at the same time, you've got this structural unemployment from the AI trade. And you've also got the need to roll over the debt at lower interest rates. This breaks a lot of stuff. So this creates an inflation cycle as a result of energy costs. That needs a big print. So excessive money printing, bigger than COVID style, in order to fix markets that are broken. We've seen private credit markets, various other things. I don't want to go too deep into this right now because I want to focus on the outcome. Then that creates where the prices of goods are too high because 92% of all assets owned by 10% of people, they benefit from all the asset price increases as a result. But as the price of goods go up, you get demand destruction. Now, if you have too much demand destruction, then you enter into a depression or a global recession. But they want a managed transition, a managed recession, so that they can extract more assets like they did during the COVID phase and the Russia-Ukraine inflationary cycle. This then leads to a recession, a correction in asset prices, retail selling, and then the venture capitalists and the vulture capitalists, they pick up long-term assets and turn everyone into serfs where you will own nothing and be happy. Now, a price of oil above $160 creates too much demand destruction. So they want to manage the price of oil so that it has the desired impact, the redistribution. And then you do things with these higher energy costs. People choose between eating and heating was how they did it last time, at these energy costs. And the only way to crash the price of oil, so all of that happens already. There's no reversing now. Supply chains are broken. For the whole of 2026, we're going to see that cycle and massive money printing and crashing the price of oil is the only way to reverse that. So even if the Strait opened today, that would crash the price of oil, but all of this impact would already have been had already. Based upon some of the destruction of infrastructure that already happened, it would take maybe 2 to 3 weeks to clear out the ships once it's open. Then in order to rebuild some of the oil infrastructure prior to this week's escalation, maybe you need 2 to 3 months to come back all the energy back online. But with this week's escalation, it's now probably a year, and even Qatar is saying up to 5 years for certain countries where they'll have to force majeure on those energy contracts. This leads to energy insecurity and all of the policies of how to preserve this energy. And eventually there'll be beta tests for lockdowns, carbon credit tracking, this whole financialization, tokenization of all these different types of agendas, where you'll only be able to consume energy and you'll be competing with artificial intelligence, and they'll financialize it and securitize it so you can trade the consumption of your energy and individual carbon credit scores integrated with social credit scores, integrated with stable coins and central bank digital currencies. This is the control layer that you need manufactured crisis and manufactured wars in order to do it. So all this to say, this isn't just a war. This is a transition between world orders. This is the deconstruction of the American military industrial complex post World War II Bretton Woods order in recognition of the financial industrial complex and the multipolar world that I've been discussing for years, and sharing that as soon as if you remember way back then, I said during the Biden administration and during the war escalation, you would end up with Trump installed, and with Trump installed, he would take responsibility for the effective fall of the US empire in a managed transition, because he's so aligned with the financial industrial complex, and he'll create a deceitful MAGA narrative. This has got nothing to do with Trump, nothing to do with TDS, Trump derangement syndrome. Whoever you put there would have had the same thing. Nothing stops this train. Same under Biden, same under Obama, same under Clinton. Open borders, closed borders. This is the financial industrial complex that all governments are subordinate to, that can manage portfolios in order to have these big shifts. As I said, you either believe like me that they can coordinate it, hedge it, or you just believe that they weaponize it as it comes and it's more organic. Anyway, so let's get into the week 3 context and why everybody believes that this is getting out of control, moving to World War III. China will join, Russia will join, and we'll enter into a regional war and world war. They're talking about the destruction of the Gulf countries, the end of the Gulf countries. Remember, they're part of the financial industrial complex layer. And when FIC wants leverage, they create events using the military industrial complex so that they can renegotiate terms based upon power dynamics, how sovereign they are, as we manage this. But they don't want the game to get off kilter. They don't want so much destruction that this goes off onto its own rail. And there are factions of power, like the military industrial complex, represented by extreme Zionists in Israel, extreme neocon Zionists in America that are used to the old world, and also hardliner factions within the IRGC that benefit from the resistance economy as a result of sanctions and adjusting to the reality. And those Iran-Contra affair types of relationships that I still believe persist today. And as I said, this works, these operations, they work. It doesn't mean everyone's in on it and they're coordinating in a boardroom. They signal through these mechanisms, but factions of power have aligned. And I believe this particular plan for the vision of the Middle East was to expel the US from the region and turn the Middle East back into West Asia, based upon the reality that China is the manufacturing base with vast sovereign wealth, vast resources. And even if America said we'll go to war with China, it will never be real because China can just switch off the exports that are required to manufacture F-35 fighter jets and various other things. So in recognition of that reality, even America's nuclear program relies upon nuclear enrichment from Russia. That kind of tells you everything you need to know. So anyway, week 1 was all about shock to pricing, the shock of we are in war, the shock of, oh, Trump betrayed us, and or the shock of, oh, Israel rules the world, the shock of we're actually, going to take on the Western Empire, the shock of the Gulf countries can have their US bases targeted, the shock of, all right, US is going into war. All of the different influencers, they have their narrative, they galvanize you into your version of the world, whether it's the Jews rule the world narrative, whether it's the, oh, Qatar is funding a Muslim invasion, radical Islamist terrorist version of the world, whether it's Trump is playing 5D chess, QTOD version of the world, whether it's, this is a religious battle between, end of time prophecies in the Jewish faith, the Muslim faith, and the Christian faith based upon the more institutionalized parts of those religion. They're feeding you your narrative and you're getting your algorithm is radicalizing you deeper and deeper, and you're finding your favorite influencer that they're boosting in order to radicalize you further into that belief system. So week one was the shock phase, and you would have blamed the war on whoever you've already predetermined by algorithm rules the world or is responsible for it. In week two, we talked about the global reset framework. I covered that all last week. That by closing the strait, all contracts are renegotiated. The world is reset. We have the global reset. Nothing stops that train. It's already happened. We are already in a multipolar world. There is no, oh, right, America's going to occupy Iran and take over all the oil fields and price it in dollar, and America's going to dominate the world and be the hegemon. None of that is happening because those that you think are fighting that battle, those that control the US government, the Western governments, are the financial industrial complex, are the ones that lobby all the politicians, are the deep state blackmail operations via all these things. So in week three, we've hit what I believe the early signs of the settlement phase beginning. This is where you bring everything to a crescendo, where it's clear you have a three-way off ramp, and you have a victory for everybody that needs the relative narrative to move to a new version of what Israel is, what US is, and what Iran is, and also what the Gulf countries are, and then the reaction from all the global powers around it. But you need a big theatrical Hollywood movie that drives everyone into the belief that we're about to enter into a nuclear war. But nuclear war is mutually assured destruction. And I can assure you, nobody wants that, despite the rhetoric. You know, the rhetoric is all for public consumption to make you think something else is happening so that you comply with you will own nothing and be happy. So the question we have to ask ourselves, why in week three do I believe that when most people believe the exact opposite? Is because I have a different structure for following markets and understanding who I think controls things and what the narratives are to radicalize you into a alternative reality, whether it's left and right, whether it's the Republicans, it's the Democrats, it's the Jews, it's the Muslims, it's imperialism, it's the radical left, it's the fascist, Nazi, whatever it is. These are all narratives to hide you from how the world really works, in my understanding of the world. So the question really is right now at this phase where we've had the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, we've had America say that this complete, victory, and yet Iran and IRGC are still able to fight back. So nothing's consistent. We've had Epstein file questions. Was this a blackmail operation? We've had, is Netanyahu alive? We've had decapitation campaigns within IRGC. All of these events have been happening over the last 3 weeks so that everybody gets the narrative that they need to off-ramp and move to the next phase of a regionally stable Middle East, the exit of America, transition to multipolar world, renegotiation of all contracts. And so you have to ask yourself, does anyone benefit from continuing this war right now? Well, from Iran's perspective, they are deeper into a dependency into China. China, which has relationships with the entire Middle East, the West, America, everyone. Everyone is dependent, but Iran is particularly dependent upon China to purchase that oil. So Iran effectively has shown that you're never going to be able to regime change. You're never going to be able to invade, but they've done decapitation campaigns. And until we're at a point where there is an IRGC and an IRGC and a reformist, Iranian government that are in line with what I believe is China's plan for normalization in the region and expulsion of US interests. And so once Iran has achieved all their goals, is there any benefit to continuing? Because the longer this goes on, the worse it gets, the more the world could start blaming Iran for what happened. At the moment, they believe Trump did it or Israel did it, which is the prevalent narrative. So Iran is at a maximum leverage point. They could close the Red Sea by activating the Houthis, which would drive the price of oil to unsustainable levels. We start getting demand destruction. Then that has impacts on China, which has impacts on the world and all those different things. So Iran is at maximum leverage point right now. What about the US? The US has a rhetoric that they can say, we took out the IRGC, we took out the nuclear program, we took out all of the weapons threat, and a justification for what comes next in terms of the inflation and everything. So US has, nothing extra to gain once we have leadership in Israel and Iran that are on board with China's plan. And then you have the Gulf and the financial industrial complex that are able to then say, hey, Mick, you've done your job. We now need to move to the next phase of profiting from rebuild contracts. We've renegotiated everything. Now it's time to get the off ramps. Does Israel benefit from this? If US falls, Israel falls with it. This whole debate that I had with Professor Zhang, where he thinks you destroy all the Gulf countries, you destroy the West, and then Pax Judaica and Israel become the next empire. I mean, Israel would be impacted by this. They've already lost all their revenue from not selling LNG to Egypt and Jordan. They've already had damage inflicted upon them, population growth decrease, significant debt increase. The stocks are going up, which means private sector is taking over national sector. They already have a victory narrative. So Israel doesn't gain, but there are certain factions of power within the US, within Iran, within Israel that have their personal interests and they'll be leveraging their personal negotiations. For example, those that benefit from war, military stocks. You have private interests, and you have those people that need to be compensated or eliminated. And that's what I believe we're witnessing. Once that is achieved, you get the off ramps, and I think that's being built. The Gulf countries have effectively hedged with their investments in US energy infrastructure. They've inflicted the damage that will have severe economic consequences. But do they benefit from keep retaliating, going into a major regional war? Absolutely not. So Iran has effectively eliminated all the tools of US colonization, and the Gulf countries don't benefit from continuing the war. Does China benefit from continuing the war? Well, they have vast reserves, and the deeper we go into a global recession, the less exports they can do, and they will enter into economic strife, which then has impact on America and everybody else as well. So China, if they have achieved the strategic goals of what they wanted to achieve, I believe at this point they have no benefit of continuing. What about Russia? Well, Russia does. Russia's pretty much the only player. So some of the false flags, I know most people think is Israel, and it probably is. The military industrial complex aligned factions of radical Zionism and neocons that may be doing these false flag operations, but also Russia does benefit. I covered that last week, how Russia has been the net winner from this, but they have genuine output constraints. They don't have unlimited gas and unlimited oil, and they get to trade it at higher prices. But at the end of the day, if demand destruction kicks in, both Iran and Russia are very insulated because of sanctions, but they still need China to prevail as a dominant force in order to continue all of the alternative payment rails, barter networks, trade routes, sanction resistant, de-dollarization infrastructure that they've set up. So while Russia might look to maximize it, that's the one that kind of benefits. And most people think Israel, but it's not reality. Like Israel, factions of power within Israel, but this is very destructive to the Israeli economy. But that doesn't, the more and more privatization happens as a result of it, the more and more debt, the more K-shaped economy, the more civil unrest. And obviously Netanyahu is maximizing his leverage before he gets regime changed as well. And he has to serve various other interests. But at this stage, all incentives point towards exit for everybody, with the exception of a few factions. And I believe that's the decapitation campaigns and the regime change. So they're being negotiated as well. So there are kind of two layers of this war. There is what's really happening, the demolition, the narrative towards World War III, the infrastructure that's being destroyed, what you're seeing on TV, what's being portrayed in X spaces, and basically the structural reality. Then there's what's being negotiated. And what's being negotiated, I believe, has never stopped, which is a continual negotiation. And part of that was this war. Then you execute what has been negotiated. You continue around the table. You have people that try and derail the plan. And then you have transnational capital that gets around through their diplomatic channels and communication channels. And in the end, Iran's going to get sanctions relief and integration into the region. That is what the Gulf countries want. That is what effectively Iran has always been trying to achieve, but America stopped it because they wanted strategic tension, Israel, Iran, death to America, death to Israel, justification for the forever war, resource extraction, and subordination of any sovereign dependency and domination by US. But now China exists, so that doesn't exist anymore. The US absolutely needs lower oil prices and a pivot to effectively Asia. This multipolar world transition needs to happen because America is dependent to replenish its military on China, rare earth minerals, manufacturing base, lower cost. And what's happened as a result of this war is that the dollar went from weakening to strengthening. DXY is up to about $100. The price of gold went down, the price of silver went down. So we went back to, during this war, people demanding dollars, which pushed the price up, which means you reverse the ability to remain independent and build the manufacturing base. Your exports become more expensive, and you end up boosting China and you become more dependent upon China. The higher the dollar goes, the lower the Chinese yuan goes. And so that reverses this shift. And so America needs to reverse that. They need to weaken the dollar, remove world reserve currency, become a regional power, subordinate its neighbors for private financial interest, and they need lower oil prices. Now they can negotiate, but if oil prices go above $160, we enter into a global financial crisis that breaks so many components in the US financial system, and the financial industrial complex, the FIC, need these lower oil prices once the reset has actually happened. And that's represented by an agreement. Now they're creating narrative that they're going to be able to brute force it. That's not part of the agreement that America, but I do believe the financial industrial complex wants to control part of the Strait of Hormuz strategic choke points in a coexisting relationship with China and with the West Asia as well. And that will be a part of getting to this new global reset, regional stability with security guarantees as part of the negotiation. Israel needs its victory narrative. We chopped off the head of the snake. There's no longer ballistic missiles. And Netanyahu, some people are speculating it's AI and it's not real. Whether that's true or not, I'm not sure. The jury's out, but he's already giving his off-ramp narrative. He's already saying there are no more ballistic missiles, despite the fact that ballistic missiles are being fired. But he just needs the off-ramp narrative, and then whatever transition he's negotiated for himself to a very different version of Israel under the next leadership. The Gulf needs stability. This has had a significant economic impact. And Qatar and Saudi were hedged through other investments, but overall, you can benefit from the price of oil increase. They had their alternative pipelines to take 50% of the shock factor. They had their investments in their partnerships with Russia, China, and US, Texas oil and gas infrastructure, which will be beneficial to the renegotiation contracts. But it really has framed Saudi as the leader and UAE as the one that is most impacted. That is full vassalization of UAE into the FIC and the Gulf Sovereign Wealth Funds eventually, as is Israel, and as is the weakening campaign with the reformed Iran that I predict will emerge from this. So the Gulf needs stability ASAP. because the more impact it gets, the more benefit it goes to FIC in their negotiation. But they don't want demand destruction by oil prices going up. So this has to end, and it has to end ASAP once the renegotiations are done. But um, what else have we got here? Right. So those are all the visible, those are all the things that are happening in reality behind the scenes you can't see. Then you have the visible things, the things that you do see. What you're seeing is you're being fed massive escalation that drives us to World War III. You're seeing strikes that are destroying infrastructure, that are destroying economies, that are going to escalate towards, Iran and the Gulf countries fighting each other, which I don't believe is part of the equation. Anything that goes back and forth there will be a tick for tack for optics only. And we're already seeing new defense munitions and contracts being signed with US at the moment. And so they get their stimulus. US is going out trying to raise 200 billion for a military industrial complex stimulus. They get to sell additional weapons, but the infrastructure is being taken down and taken out. We're seeing lots of rhetoric from all sides. America saying we're the greatest, we're the best, we've won. Israel saying we've taken down the head of a snake. Iran is terrorism will no longer threaten us. We're going to rebuild these oil routes, Greater Israel Project, all the different things to the different factions. On the Iran and IRGC side, we're seeing we're fighting a holy war. We are taking on imperial Western powers, and there ain't nothing the Gulf countries do. We got a very large army. We got partnerships with Russia and China, superior intelligence, asymmetric warfare. We got drones that are very cheap to produce with our own internal manufacturing base. This costs billions of dollars for America and Israel, and all of the different rhetoric that's coming from it as well. We're not negotiating all that type of stuff. This is what I call negotiation theater. This is every time you announce something, it is a signal to the other side around the points that are being negotiated. Okay, so what is the market signal that we're seeing? So yesterday, I haven't looked at the markets today because I'm recording this a bit early, but oil went up to about $115. And we started to see a disjointment for example, in Oman, the price went to $150 to $170. In America, it was a bit cheaper at 1995, around those points. Europe started getting significant increases in energy. This is massive, massive leverage in negotiation, but so far it hasn't gone part that psychological part. I believe that America has a structural short futures contract in order to suppress the price. Now we're starting to get Iranian sanction relief for oil on water, just like we saw for Russia. Iran is selling into these higher prices. The strait is open for China and Iran, and now they're getting sanction relief, as it was the case for Russia. And so that's keeping oil within that ceiling. Now, what happened yesterday? As we were escalating, the price of gold crashed down to approximately a low of 4,700 from a high of 5,500. So, we've almost in the peak lost about $1,000 in these moves. Silver came back down to $70, and the VIX went from peak volatility of about 27 to about 22. So volatility is decreasing. Gold off ramps led to a market crash. Peak buying by retail of gold and silver and commodities, but institutions were selling into that. That means the smart money knows that this is coming to an end, and they believe that that this is not going to escalate to World War III or a ginormous regional war. That this is strategic targeting. We're seeing way more targeting of infrastructure that impacts prices. If Iran was genuinely here to eliminate Israel, then we would have seen way more aggressive action on Israeli assets. But instead, it's just been targeting at the financial infrastructure and the economic war. We had the Federal Reserve come out and said we're going to hold rates. We had the hot print in inflation, but markets is pricing that this is going to be, basically, constrained. This isn't going to get out of control, despite the optics saying that it is going to get out of control. The economic impact is here: recession, demand destruction, inflation cycle. Everyone needs to prepare for inflation. Nothing stops that train. Supply chain disruption. All of that's going to happen throughout 2026 and maybe into 2027. But everything's pointing towards resolution because there's nothing to gain for anybody. We've already seen that oil threshold. I covered this last week. $110 to $120. Once 120 kicks in, you start to get a bigger and bigger inflation shock. You start to get a political crisis between the players. You start to see the more severe recession kick in. And at basically $115, everything kind of flips around that to making sure it doesn't get too above. And as I said, I believe US has a structural short position to suppress the prices, so they need the price to come down at some stage within the futures contract or option contract expiry definition. Now, we've already had leadership disruption. On the Iran side, we no longer have Khamenei, but it was replaced with Khamenei. I believe Khamenei was cooperating with this transition of normalization between Iran and Saudi Arabia, brokered via China. And I believe that his son will be succession planning. I don't believe it's going to be what people think. I think this is going to be pragmatic. Now, if the son gets taken out, maybe that's the next thing we see in the escalation cycle, or maybe he's the one that's actually supporting that he can sign off on the plan once the plan is agreed and everyone has to go with it, including IRGC. Then you have various factions of IRGC that have been through the decapitation campaign. We haven't seen Khamenei, the son, yet, so there's been no public, so we're not sure. There's uncertainty. What comes from that? We saw Lonjani, which basically we got a confirmation that he has been taken out, and there were 3 leadership positions this week that were taken out that I believe would come into IRGC hardliners. This one was a bit confusing because he's a bit more pragmatic. So I'm not sure, why that needed to happen or what's happening behind the scenes. But I believe that now already you could say the IRGC that remains, that's ready for a deal, if they are ready for a deal, they've been hit. So that gives the narrative that's needed for the off-ramps. On the Israel side, we've had really strange things with Netanyahu. We've had accusations that his last 3 updates are AI, with actually very plausible cases. I don't know what the outcome of that is, but we also saw in the last video that some allege is AI, others say is real. There was no press invited. So very suspicious circumstances that people are speculating. You had the 6 fingers. You had the coffee shop where he looked like he was 10 years, 20 years younger. So very suspicious and strange circumstances around that. But he's absent from all the meetings. He's not engaging in the political process to the extent that he was before. And he's also giving an off-ramps narrative. He's saying Iran no longer has ballistic missiles, talking about energy routes and various other things. There is the vice president or prime minister, sorry, I forget which one it is. Levin, is he working as interim? Well, he's more extreme. So does that create a more extreme narrative until we get to this transition to a reformist and leftist government? And so, Katz is allegedly leading at the moment. And so the frame is really set for a transition to a left-leaning, GCC integrated, Palestinian solution recognized regional stability as per China's plan. Normalization between Iran and Saudi Arabia, Palestinian resolution. And remember what I've always said. I said peace in the Middle East happens when you normalize between Iran and Saudi Arabia, you resolve the Palestinian cause so the military Israel stops being used as a MiC destabilization outpost, and you need America to exit the region. This is America's exit. This is all of those things. So that's why I believe that this is genuinely going to lead to something better at the end of it. Everybody needs their on ramp, their off ramp narrative, and I'm starting to see some of those different things coming. So both in Iran and Israel, we're seeing instability in terms of leadership. We're seeing change, and we're seeing a transition path as well. But the markets are calm relative to this is such a disaster. Gold prices should be shooting up if this was genuine escalation cycle. Stock markets should be reacting more aggressively. It is pricing in the disruption, the inflationary cycle and the demand destruction and recession cycle, but it's not disaster. The markets are far too calm. They know something. And so the interpretation that I have is that basically all of the problems that we're seeing and being identified right now are becoming the incentives for the renegotiation as well. Now, who is left that may be trying to derail the plan? And what are the incentives? Who could derail this? And I think that a lot of that is happening when we've had targeting of Iranian school children, 6 to 12-year-old. So sad. Absolute tragedy. Who's doing these operations? US is blame shifting, saying we're not sure if it was us. It was either US or Israel, or and obviously for Israel, that's normal as well. But for Netanyahu, he basically needs war in order to try and get he needs war in order to get maximum leverage, but he also needs to manage the transition if his deal has been agreed to. So he needs to be useful for power, otherwise he could be eliminated. There could be internal elimination. There could be external elimination. That could come from any faction of power. That could come from Iran, IRGC. It could come from China. It could come from Russia. It could come from America. It could come internal in Israel. It could come from private interest that doesn't like the direction that Netanyahu's taking it. It could come from radical, neocon Zionists. It could come military industrial complex, deep state, whatever it is. We don't know, but there are many hurdles around Netanyahu. And Mujtaba Khomeini, like the other one. Now, he can't just suddenly come out and announce peace, because if he does it too early, it looks like he's tapped out. So these are problematic things. I'm not sure what the strategy is, but I'll be observing these things in terms of the off ramps as well. These are effectively blockers to peace. You can't have new leadership that negotiates peace right away without a severe Hollywood theatrical movement, and also Netanyahu's personal interest as well as factions of power within the IRGC that benefit from the economy that's been set up under sanctions, which is once you react to sanctions, you have partnership with trafficking routes, you have personal interest in military contracts, you have various power that is enforced via controlling trafficking routes. So you have internal struggles as well. And these can all be impediments to what I thought would be a 12-day war, a bit more theatrical and controlled, to where we are right now. But everything is moving faster directionally in the same direction. So what are the shifts we've seen in week 3? Many of the blockers have been effectively removed or eliminated in terms of hardliners, in terms of rumors about what's been happening in Israel. We've had many people sidelined in order to move towards the plan. Obstacles removed, by targeting assets, renegotiating contracts, and we are now in what I call a settlement window. The settlement window is what I think we're in week 3. So this is where I think those that were negotiating have already started deciding on where are we at, what are the obstacles, what do we do next, How do we get this to a settlement so we don't derail and the fact that no one really gains from this at this stage? Um, what we have as well in terms of the real control, both on the military side, but it's also the financial side. So FIC has powers. So MIC has military escalation, and FIC has, as I said, FIC control shares in MIC, so they never allow it to go out of control, but sometimes they go off on separate paths. MIC is funded by Pentagon budgets. They have a degree of autonomy. FIC controls capital markets, so they can destroy share price. They need to get the balance right here when they enter into these battles. Now, even FIC and MIC can be aligned because they want to maximize profits in the war before they set the narrative for the next war theater as well. Obviously, Europe, Central South America, and any narrative around Taiwan and the agent around the Asia side as well. But insurance is a real mechanism of control. As I said, you can shut down the strait by allowing planes to be insured, allowing insurance in the Red Sea, but not allowing insurance in the in that side. We are still yet to get conclusive evidence that any ships have actually been destroyed. There was one in Sri Lanka. There was shrapnel that has been hit. There's been rhetoric, but we don't have conclusive evidence that this has been enforced through naval warfare yet. And remember, if you take out ships with oil tankers, then you have the destruction of the water infrastructure, which would be very harmful to everybody, Qatar, to Iran. So no one benefits from allowing that escalation cycle to go that far. And of course, if this was to the point where you wanted to inflict lethal destruction, then there would be targeting of water sanitation plants. We did see one that I believe to be a false flag in Iran. But if there was a retaliation to the Gulf countries, that's full water dependency. That's absolute, disaster. That's a Hiroshima bomb in terms of civilian targets as well. Now, America has been doing that in Cuba with wiping out their energy infrastructure, which is terrorism to the highest degree, but only shipments, that it's only really insurance that's kind of held that right now. So that can be returned by insuring, which needs settlement and obviously as well. But insurance, they cancelled, I think, quite strategically. As I said, the planes were going, the Red Sea was never cancelled, but it was for the Strait of Hormuz. So there's an element of financial interception there as well in that stuff, in terms of those control and flow. Now that sets a renegotiation of energy contracts, which helps the financial industrial complex as well, which is what is really happening here. If you could summarize everything, it is an energy reset. That's what is the real impact. And it's not just oil. The Hormuz, as I've said in previous episode, it requires liquefied natural gas, LNG, for electricity. It also has a significant stranglehold on fertilizers, which impacts the agricultural industry. Also, aluminium, which is important for many manufacturing components and various other things. Petrochemicals for the pharmaceutical industries. Helium is the latest one where we've seen significant interest. That is no alternative dependency, essential for certain supply chains. Shipping, power. There is effectively, by closing the Strait of Hormuz, 50 different systems that I'm aware of that basically need to be renegotiated and are basically repricing simultaneously. We're getting absolute carnage in the commodities markets. And this is going to cause carnage in the supply chains for the rest of the year, even if we open today. This is going to take a long time to shift through. So the global reset has happened, even if we get the outcome right now. But what has become effectively the smoking gun is liquefied natural gas, electricity, AI trade, semiconductor chips, all sorts of stuff. And so what we saw this week is that there was effectively an Iran was stricken. Iran strikes. America said it wasn't us. Israel said we did it without America in the Netanyahu, what might have been AI or might have been real speech. And Trump provided the narrative that we ask Israel not to do that again. And so we had the strikes, we had the plausible deniability, we had now Netanyahu's cooperating in all narratives now. That implies to me that he has reached his settlement and he is complying with that settlement in the AI speeches or real speeches, whichever one it is. But anyway, we had the targeting of LNG infrastructure within Iran that created the new escalation cycle, pushed the price of gas in Europe up 30%, and pushed the price of oil up to these new levels with the disjointed prices that I've been covering. That was last Latani. Sorry if I'm saying that wrong. Um, yeah, basically that took us to the next reaction. I gave a market update in real time and said Iran has to retaliate to that. And so there was a retaliation on Qatar LNG structures. And so this halts the LNG contracts. We had the declaration of force majeure affecting mainly Asian countries and some European countries. So now Asian countries need to renegotiate with Russia, and European countries either need to renegotiate with Russia or need to renegotiate with America. So European gas, we're now up approximately 52%. And that was really the main publicly facing thing. That creates economic crisis within Europe, more subordination, more vassalization into private sector interest, more acquisitions, more K-shaped economy, more wealth inequality, potential austerity. The government is used just for propping up, the MIC and the FIC and the TIC. Civil unrest can be used in order to create the police and surveillance state. But here's the hidden parts that people don't consider or didn't actually, maybe they didn't know if they're not following the money. There is something called the Golden Pass LNG structure within Texas. And that is 70% owned by Qatar and 30% owned by ExxonMobil. And so if you renegotiate, you do force majeure within the Qatar at the lower prices, renegotiate contracts via the US rails, then does that not explain the US Qatari relationship? On the surface, Qatar's being decimated, destroyed, and US is profiteering. On the other side, they were completely lined and hedged up for this. So the US is the largest LNG exporter in the world. That's what changed this whole multipolar world order and led to where we are. Europe effectively takes 68% of its oil after the Russian sanctions, and that will increase now that we've had the Qatari closure, but they can hedge it via the US Texas industry. So who benefits from that? It's not America as a nation, it's US LNG producers. And that is owned by Qatar and ExxonMobil. And so this shifts geography, creates new strategic choke points, and vassalizes US interest into the private sector US LNG that is owned by Qatari interests as well. And so this is privatization. It doesn't help America. You get the rhetoric, America's benefiting, Trump, you're the savior, you're helping us, but all you're doing is vassalizing assets into the Gulf Sovereign Wealth Fund, and also creating strategic choke points for the financial industrial complex and obviously ExxonMobil. So this basically helps US energy dominance in the Western Hemisphere, but that is vassalized and owned by the private financial industrial complex, big oil, and private corporate interests, which is managed by BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, managed by Gulf Sovereign Wealth Fund inflows, China Sovereign Wealth Fund, Singapore Sovereign Wealth Fund, Norway Sovereign Wealth Fund, and others that are able to use their energy and control energy flows. So that's really the key insights. Basically, the entity that lost the supply owns the repurchase supply, and you get to renegotiate on separate terms at higher prices in distress. So net that all out, and you're probably better off overall. We'll see. And so, really, the conclusion is that this is not disruption. This is 100% transition. Okay. What about fertilizers and food? That's going to cause major supply chain issues throughout the year that we've all got to adjust to. There will be issues in shelving. I'm already starting to see this. I went to a shop. I wanted to buy some dates to break my fast. They were relying upon dates from Qatar, and they're out of stock. So I've already just started to see the beginning parts of that. But there are fixed windows when you do agricultural industry. You have to meet the seasons. Now, I talked about India needing fertilizers. It looks like they had enough fertilizer strategic reserves in order to make this crop. But if this goes on for longer, then they either renegotiate those terms or they have food insecurity. So that gives leverage to the American agricultural trade, which is those multinationals, but that creates issue with the farmers in India. That disruption can be weaponized by the financial industrial complex to get a strategic foothold in BRICS, so that they can get more distressed purchases of the agriculture industry. Then that gives them more leverage as we transition to this multipolar world. So they can use US to push that disruption. And that disruption basically, it basically leads to premature losses, renegotiation of contracts, delayed global, food crisis. And what can you do with a food crisis? You can push a narrative that you need to consume this type of food, not this type of food. You will own nothing and be happy. And you'll start to get the large World Economic Forum funded organizations around food insecurity pushing out their propaganda as a result of this disruption. So we're going to see that throughout 2026. Energy narratives, food narratives based upon these supply chains. And that's going to create an industrial cascade. Now, what was the end result of tariff policies, COVID, Operation Warp Speed? The end result is large multinational institutions gobbled up all the small business, and you ended up with massive wealth inequality, concentration of power. Trump has done it again. This is the new Operation Warp Speed based upon the Iran war, and this will lead to massive concentration, just like the tariffs did. Remember, I said tariffs will create small businesses being concentrated into large business within America, export dependent countries being concentrated into the same multinational institutions, and everybody renegotiating eastward with reliable partners in ASEAN blocks and GCC blocks. And we're starting to see disrupt that. And then you have this new cascading concentration of power in this. So we've seen aluminium price spikes that causes issues in supply chains, issues in petrochemicals and pharmaceuticals, plastics get disrupted, the supply chains that pushes prices up, power, everything is basically repricing as a result of this. And I believe by design. That's why you have these big impacts. Now, one of them also is helium and artificial intelligence. This one becomes really structurally important. Much of the growth from America was dependent upon building the data centers for AI. That was boosting manufacturing, boosting technology purchases, providing stimulus justification with, Operation, I think it was Stargate, the first thing Trump announced. $500 billion, I think it was $500 billion, 500 billion, yeah, invested in that. That helps the technical industrial complex. They're going to be going through stress that might lead to consolidation. Maybe we don't get IPOs this year. The IPOs is what would lead to the growth. If you don't get the OpenAI IPO, maybe SpaceX connected to XAI, Anthropic, these were all meant to happen. Maybe they get consolidated into Google, Apple, some of the big tech, more concentration. We may not get those IPOs if this carries on for a lot longer. But with helium, 35% of the supply is impacted as a result of the Strait of Hormuz. This basically is also needed in the semiconductor industry, which requires South Africa to get LNG. Sorry, not South Africa, South Korea rather. And that impacts the AI trade, semiconductor trade, renegotiation of AI chips, and also healthcare as well. All of these different things. The shipping chaos, initially it was 7,000 ships in the backlog. They were all waiting. I've heard that it's about 3,500 right now. We have initially 400 tankers that represent 200 million barrels. And so you can have sanction relief on the oil on water. They're going back and forth, renegotiating, based upon who's going to pay the rest, who's in the crisis the most. That's pushing up prices. That's leading to predatory terms. We've got basically floating reporting systems and all of this type of disruption. Okay. In terms of Iran, so they cannot spill oil. So if they do something that leads to the contamination of the water, that's something they can't do in terms of the escalation cycle. So all they can do is basically destroy the infrastructure that leads to these renegotiations and prices. Now, this impacts the Gulf populations if there were any type of oil spillage and any type of infrastructure that actually targets, the actual people. This is leading to a lot of people leaving. In the case of Dubai, they're starting to see that people were selling their gold below spot. Gold is the largest market of gold is Dubai. We started to see the central bank of Dubai look to help the banks. There was targeting of Citibank, which is quite symbolic. So they're targeting banking infrastructure, Western infrastructure, and people are starting to sell gold. Why are they selling gold? Because if you're fleeing a country, then you can't take your gold with you because where you land may confiscate it. And so the price of Bitcoin started going up because people were converting gold to Bitcoin so they can hold it in self-custody. And then they're able to take their wealth wherever they need to go. Now, people were willing to buy it at a discount, but it was 30 to 50 cents below the spot prices. The financial system was impacted. We also had indications that you don't own your money. This is where the self-custody story comes in. They built a financial sector and they said, in distress, we'll stop you being able to withdraw. So this weakens their reputation as a financial hub, which has a correction in real estate. And what are institutional buyers doing? They're buying up Dubai real estate. So Dubai is being vassalized into the financial industrial complex as a strategic leverage point over the GCC in partnership with the Gulf Sovereign Wealth Funds, while Saudi ends up being the person that solved the oil, the person that solved the pipelines, the person that came in against UAE, the country that also held out for a Palestinian cause. Everything is being lined up for Saudi to be the global hegemon. And remember that good cop, bad cop relationship between UAE and Saudi. I think the FIC is getting UAE. They will acquire assets in Israel as it gets more distress. And Saudi is being set as the global hegemon in partnership with Egypt and Turkey as the military wings of a regional stability as well. Escalations are controlled, though. People think it's chaos. I've been watching every single escalation. It's always controlled and contained to enter into a new phase of negotiation of financial contracts. This may be that in order for Iran to get sanctions relief, this is what they needed to deliver for China that was negotiating via the Gulf funds, that was in partnership with the financial industrial complex. You have the communication channels via Qatar, various other communication channels. It may be to get sanctions relief, you needed to implement this global reset and effectively outsource the destruction and expulsion of US from the region in order to have this massively changing end vision of regional stability. Now, well, the one we need to watch right now, and it may have changed in real time today, is the Red Sea risk. So the alternative routes with the Strait of Hormuz closure has been that you can get alternative pipelines via UAE and Saudi Arabia that's taken the 20 million barrels to the point where they can still get 7 million barrels out. But it relies upon the Red Sea. The Red Sea, if you remember, was closed as a result of a Houthis blockade when they targeted a ship. Under the Biden administration, they did massive air campaigns that didn't take out the Houthis. Then under the Trump administration, they did the same thing. And then the ceasefire was agreed. And the Houthis enter an agreement with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia expelled UAE. UAE got the strategic points in Somaliland. Turkey got the Somalia route. So all of the different choke points have been renegotiated. However, the Saudi agreement and the Houthis agreement needs to hold. At the moment, they're starting to give indications that they could close the Red Sea. This might be the theatrical final wave that gets us to a dramatical end game. But if we have closure in the Red Sea, we're definitely going to get to the next stage of escalation cycle with increases in prices again, both gas and oil as well. This could take oil to approximately $150. It already is in Oman, plus. And once it gets to $160, I think that is the point of end. Now, whether that happens or not, we'll see. But this creates the global breakdown at $160 where all players lose because you just have massive demand destruction. You break the financial system. You don't get the bailout you need. The bailouts are ineffective. You get a depression rather than a recession. So none of that can happen, but this might push it towards that. And then we get the off-ramp narrative where no one would gain and everybody needs to do this as well. So Houthis could provide the off-ramp narrative, or it could be something like Operation Midnight Hammer, or it could be a limited ground invasion with 6,000 troops in Island. Now, remember, those we've been hearing about the island where 90% of Iran's energy exports happen. However, I spoke to an energy expert. Between 2019 and 2022, that was closed. They have alternative port infrastructure. They've already hedged against that. So from what I've heard, it will increase prices. It will make things a bit more difficult, but it's not fatal. It doesn't kill the market to $160 or above. And if you want to invade Iran proper, you need 600,000 troops. And so far, we've just seen there are a few thousand there and a few thousand more. So to me, this is the theatrical element of the off-ramp narrative. We also need to be aware of Russia because Russia does benefit if this goes on for longer. So maybe they're going off plan slightly. They're basically exporting 4.11 million barrel per day exports. So they're the largest supplier at the moment. 3.44 million barrels is up 99K to their average. And these are record prices. I mean, the biggest we've had is $147. But if we get those record prices, and they're selling them to India, so that vassalizes India further into the control grid as a resistance against the financial industrial complex. And they kind of benefit from longer, but they don't want demand destruction. But this is basically the biggest revenue surge I think Russia has ever seen. When we look at and remember, this is nationalized oil. This isn't privatized oil. So it helps the actual people, the war effort, their power, their negotiation power, everything. But the end result of all of this is Europe is going to be vassalized into US LNG structure, which is privatized into the financial industrial complex, which also has partnership rails with the Gulf sovereign wealth funds as well. Asia is going to be vassalized into Russian oil rails and infrastructure. China is effectively going to be dependent upon Iranian oil, Gulf oil, all the different energy supplies. They will eventually build their alternative rails as well, like solar panels, wind power, everything they're doing. And obviously, Europe will want to buy a hedge against America, so they'll end up buying a bunch of stuff from China in order to facilitate that. That can only be more expensive as well. So, you get a revival of that, energy net zero type of thing as well. We also started to hear different types of things which might have been involved in the negotiation. We heard China say that if Taiwan wants help because they are energy insecure, in their partnership with Russia, then if you want to have a nice reunification, a peaceful reunification with China, of course we want to help our brothers and sisters in Taiwan. And obviously that reduces financial industrial complex, but there may have been a negotiation there leading up to the Xi Jinping meeting. Now we've heard that that might be delayed. I don't know whether it will be delayed or not. Maybe they meet on time, maybe they don't. But all of these different things are leading up to that well-defined. This means Ukraine integration being split across BlackRock financial industrial complex, vassalized into Russia, and the new security architecture. But they want war. Military need new war, so I think they'll continue that for the foreseeable future in order to make up for lost profits in the Middle East. But basically, the Middle East is using this with the sovereign wealth funds negotiating with the financial industrial complex in order to get the most favorable terms, and the escalation cycles are pushing those contracts in favor based upon false flags, but everything's coming towards a completely different multipolar world in my side. Europe is going to be completely vassalized into the financial industrial complex, no autonomy, all decision making for private interest. And Central and South America is basically being pushed into FIC as well. And Trump obviously created the narrative with Cuba through energy insecurity, also giving some of the Gulf funds and Chevron and Exxon. Exxon pulled out. Chevron can't do it at a profit. Some of the Venezuelan contracts, only Saudi can do that at those lower oil prices by having a longer term vision. And obviously, this is the Western Hemisphere, and that keeps those rails going. No one in America is going to benefit from the oil. The strategic petroleum reserves are being reduced. Inflation is going up. That's what the more people. Debt's going up. But a few oil companies get to benefit from the oil price increase as a result of it. But you're told we're MAGA. America's making America great again. This is the multipolar energy map. That was the purpose for this war. And they have escalated rather than a 12-day war into a complete global reset. The world has never been the same again. Now, what does this actually mean for everybody? So, there is financial stress in the private credit markets. That's the AI trade. If this goes on for too long, that stress becomes socialized losses, privatized gains. There may be a bailout, a few $1 trillion, maybe $5 trillion, that's needed for that. What about any of the AI funding and the AI infrastructure? That's a strategic choke point for the technical industrial complex and leverage in their negotiations. That may have to be bailed out if you haven't got the gold funds, if you haven't got the private credit, which was providing that funding. If you enter into a recession, maybe there's another $5 trillion print that's needed that. What if we continue this and we don't get withdrawals and we get Red Sea? That would need to stimulus checks, military industrial complex stimulus checks, increased budget, which we're already seeing 200 billion, plus individual stimulus checks as well. So maybe there's another trillion there. Losses are going to be basically absorbed in by the large multinational financial institutions that will socialize the losses, privatize the game, will get concentration of wealth. This is effectively Operation Warp Speed 2.0. Thanks, Trump. Again, nothing to do with Trump. He's just serving financial power and getting rich, as do all politicians. Right, we started to see issues in the bond market. The bond market is indicating stagflation. So a period of low economic growth into a recession, high inflation, and higher cost of borrowing, which means you have the rates are going up and up globally. Yields on 10-year bonds, 20-year bonds, 30-year bonds, 2-year bonds in more distressed countries like UK, they're all going up. And so that creates another issue. So the fact yields is going up, but the debt cost is going up. So we're being, more and more debt is being issued at higher and higher prices. That creates a financial crisis stress on the debt rollover. And so if that's resolved through a big print plus oil prices, there's nothing but inflation. Inflation is inevitable, predictable, guaranteed. That will create a slowdown. Slowdown then leads to deflation. And that creates massive US political pressure. And so that's why this has to come to an end. There's no situation where I can see this going on for months without a ginormous depression where everybody loses. And so I believe everybody will be planning their exit right now. On the Trump side, they'll be planning their closure victory narrative, and they're preparing it this week and next week. And what did we see? We saw Joe Kent. Joe Kent worked for the Department of Homeland Security, and he put a letter out there. He's doing the podcast circuit. I don't believe it's organic. He said, I retired because this war was for Israel, so blamed it just on Israel. It is Israel. It's totally their fault. But Israel is a division of the US military, which is captured, and it benefits this whole structural rollover of the debt-based Ponzi scheme and wealth extraction from the American people via this money laundering organization to the asset holder as well. So the blame Israel narrative persists. So Trump can take the off ramps by saying, I'm the hero. This was Israel's thing. It could be a covert narrative. And we're starting to see podcasters like David Sachs from the PayPal Mafia partnership with Peter Thiel being AI infrastructure, stablecoin AI infrastructure, and also Elon Musk building out the social credit score. But on his podcast circuit, David Sachs is starting to say, we need to exit. This could destroy Israel, admitting that Iran has the capacity, which is the alternative narrative to the Trump narrative. So you have these competing assets, which I believe are leading to off-ramp. You're getting it from Netanyahu, you're getting it from Trump, you're getting it from financial industrial complex, military industrial complex, technical industrial complex, and you're getting, and I believe you'll be getting it from the IRGC and Iran as well. We've seen NATO fragmentation as a result of this. Trump came along, said, hey, Japan, hey, Europe, hey, South Korea, join us in opening up the Strait of Hormuz. They can't do it. America can't do it. And they all said they can't do it. So this is fragmenting the NATO partnership as well. And that's causing lots of volatility. But effectively, the strait is closed until IRGC agrees to it, and there's no alternative. And so IRGC has to be engaged in diplomacy. If there's more decapitation campaigns to get to the end result, it's going to happen. I don't see an alternative. There's no way you drop a nuke that creates demand destruction everywhere. Everyone just then needs gold, and Bitcoin in self-custody. Price will probably correct, but it will be anything in your hand that helps you in that scenario. I don't believe that's really what's happening here. There's no option to open the strait without a negotiation. Military pressure can't be applied without creating destruction across the whole region. And I believe FIC is in charge as well. So this is managed escalation with MIC, bounded by FIC, and oil price is the mechanism. Europe is going to obviously rearm. That was part of the negotiation. You'll have new defense markets as a result of these negotiations. And I believe the US-Israeli split narrative is, coming. And really, who is the FIC vassalizing? Israel, India, UAE. And so that's the partnership that is formed that is providing the negotiation pressure against the sovereign wealth fund and the other thick-aligned factions as well. And so this is merging into a final agreement. It enables the reset. Um, and then we're also seeing Iran repositioning. So in the Joe Kent letter, it said Iran does not pose a threat. There is no, it was no threat to America. And so we're already starting to see on US rails, Tucker Carlson saying Iran's not a threat. Um, and even Netanyahu saying there's no ballistic missiles. All of that points towards America started the war, Iran is in defense. And so you have a repositioning of in the mind where even Americans are supporting Iran in this war against Israel. And so you get, really a repositioning of Iran. We're taking out the hardliners, we're removing the program, and then they're going to open up with the financial industrial complex in exchange for sanction relief. They're no longer the rogue. They are now in this operation, in the mind of many, the victim. So they've been repositioning the narrative. And I personally believe that Iran, via the China plan that Trump will take credit for, that I believe that this is the final delivery by the pragmatic elements of the IIGC and the reformist elements of the Iranian government in partnership with China's plan to de-dollarize and turn the Middle East into West Asia, where all new contracts will be negotiated. And I believe that Iran gets sanction relief in exchange for delivering the exact set of circumstances that allows for this transition without lighting up the Middle East. I think it's incredibly smart. I think it's incredibly pragmatic. I think it puts an end to the proxy era. I think it puts an end to the US and European empires and Sykes-Picot Act that destroyed the Middle East in endless forever wars based upon covert operations. And I think it changes the world, quite frankly. And so in the end of this, it gives the legitimacy that's needed to make the transaction after decades and decades of narrative building. And the game theory from here, as I see it, is that all powers will likely escalate to negotiate. Escalate to de-escalate, I think, is the technical term that leads to an exit off-ramps narrative and a theatrical transition that puts an end to this. There's no incentives that I'm aware of to continue other than ones that I outlined. And I think anyone that's incentivized in that direction will either be negotiated or eliminated or decapitated in order to get everything back on track in terms of where this is meant to go. Effectively, we have seen via Trump the delivery of Operation Warp Speed 2.0, which was always about selling more vaccines, resetting the world order into a technical industrial complex led order. We had Biden with the open borders in between. We have Trump with the closed borders, and the Uni Party continues exactly where it left off and transitions the world to multipolarity in an environment of collapsing birth rates where that only can be fixed, it seems, by AI and robotics. And so your job is to get on the right side of that. So what's being destroyed right now is really giving me all the indication. It's destroying infrastructure that can be rebuilt that has significant implications in terms of Western and American allegiances. Is contracts that determine the flow of energy and make countries vassals, subordinates, or leaders in terms of energy trade routes. It's trade systems and supply chains that are being destroyed and rebuilt. And it's Western dominance in the Middle East that I believe is being handed over to the financial industrial complex and a multipolar world. So what replaces it? Well, we're already in that multipolar world that I've been talking about a long time. It's BRICS that is aligned with, West via these trade agreements, which is a very dangerous strategy. So the ones that are most vassalized, i.e., UAE, India, and various other nations, can be used to infiltrate. But hopefully, financial contracts keeps things together until we enter into the next stage of theater. Um, I think we're getting reorganized flows of all energy and all agreements. And I think the structure is that the East will rebuild the infrastructure, which will be funded by the sovereign wealth funds in partnership with FIC to try and stop going back to the Mick Forever War model in the regions that have been negotiated. Continual escalation in terms of civil unrest, the private prison system, the police and surveillance state in the West, as well as agreed war zones and agreed controlled, military defense contracts. And I think Europe will be the one, and Europe, Central and South America will be the making up for lost profits, internal civil unrest, continued issues there, and a resolution to what's going to happen in Asia around, around Taiwan and various other choke points as well. The strategic tension, if it's likely to occur, will be from between India and China on the BRICS layer, and then UAE and the GCC, but I don't believe it will ever spiral into something that will reset the world order until we start this whole process again. I think the West will continue to provide innovation for as long as the stock markets are liquid, but that will be for the benefit of transnational capital. And so you have to be an asset owner in order to benefit from that. And you need to avoid debt in order to not be the product on the wrong side of that, I'd have always seen. I think assets that are multipolar in nature that allow for self-custody is how you protect yourself, whether that's gold in physical form, whether that's Bitcoin in self-custody. We will get at the end of this, probably 26, 27, a self-custody story, force majeure, cancellation of contracts, the understanding between the difference between paper agreements where you will own nothing and be happy, and your ability to directly own, which will control your ability to adjust when you need to change countries, change jurisdictions. If you can't change countries, then rural, community-led. These are the initiatives of how you protect yourself. Make sure you're utilizing technology, but spending one eye on independence, decentralized solutions. These are the different things. The Middle East will be the central hub between BRICS and China-led manufacturing base. A more regional America that will need to adjust to this reality, that its military industrial complex depends upon China, and massive wealth transfer in K-shaped economies as well. So those that own the assets effectively win. Those who hold the debt become the product, is the end result. In order to get there, we needed this energy crisis in order to shift all the policy responses that we're seeing right now. That then creates the shortages that we will witness throughout 2026, and also the price spikes and volatility to reset the contracts and enforce those force majeures. You need to pick your jurisdiction for basically all the different jurisdictions will adjust based upon demand reduction. And so your governments will start saying, please reduce your dependency upon these food types, upon these energy, upon these different components. And the idea is that they want the behavior change, just like Operation Warp Speed 2.0. They wanted you at home, normalized into technology, a product of the algorithm. So your job is to spend enough time doing the opposite, but they will utilize this in order to get behavioral changes based upon energy and food insecurity. And we already got the IEA, the International Energy Association, maybe that's what it is, I'm assuming, They put out a framework today. What did it actually say? Sorry, International Energy Agency. They pushed out their recommendations, just like World Health Organization recommendations. And what were those recommendations? Work from home, reduce driving, which is perfect in line with the fully autonomous drivers that are coming. Limit travel, stay at home, shift consumption patterns. What are they really saying? Basically, look at what these, what, excuse me, at the end of this right now. Effectively, look at what these actually are. It's basically less movement, less consumption, less ownership, and basically an escalation on a path to energy crisis, demand reduction, behavioral control. And where does this lead us? Basically, um, energy saving lockdowns is some things we might see next. We're already starting to see tracking systems and acceleration of the police and surveillance state, digital, social credit scores, digital carbon credit scores, digital enforcement, pre-crime, Palantir, all of the things that the World Economic Forum and the business interests have been working on. So your exit ramps and likely exit ramps when they try and push forward initiatives that they've been trying to push forward, individual carbon tracking and credit scores. So you will be competing with artificial intelligence for energy. You'll be choosing based upon receiving a favorable carbon credit scores. A basically reward and incentivized consumption so that you get additional points based upon what you consume, whether they consider it favorable. Programmable energy use integrated into programmable money. And we know who was here to deliver that. The key nodes in the network we've been talking about time and time again. Elon Musk, David Sachs, Peter Thiel, the PayPal mafia, the types of people that were mentioned in the Epstein files, and David Sachs started driving a little bit of the exit narrative. So this is basically how we move from war off ramps into the control grids. And you need to be aware of it and you need to be preparing now. You either believe this is a crisis that is being weaponized and they adjust based upon the crisis, or like me, you follow the money and you believe it's actually being engineered with multiple strategies that are hedged and they keep pushing away at the end game and nothing stopped this train. If you are deep in debt and you don't prepare for this, and I want as many people on the right side of this change, which is why I continue to give this content, you will own nothing and be happy was the phrase that they actually gave. And so with that in mind, that's everything I'm seeing in week 3, following the money, making sure you're getting ahead, and why I believe this does come to an end. And you need to adjust to the world that you see based upon trying to get ahead of this. And this is what the market is telling me. And we also saw yesterday defense stocks down, implying that we are coming towards the negotiated solution as well. So what I want to do right now is while I was traveling, I decided to go and catch up with Peter McCormack in his studio for our second interview. We got almost 600,000 views, and it was his top 5 podcast in 10 years of podcasting. And so we wanted to catch up for part 2. And I'm going to be calling this Weaponizing the Iran War. You will own nothing and be happy. So it's not going through the week 3 minutia details that build upon week 2 and week 1. But this is my second interview. And I hope you enjoy the interview. Please do like, subscribe, share. We'll break this down into two on my blog, simondixon.com. We'll create AI summaries, little whiteboard videos that get it down to 5 minutes. AI summaries that gets it down to a 15-minute summary of everything we covered, as well as the long form content, or you can have the entire content. So I give all the details in the long form content. You can download them from my Apple podcast or Spotify, or you can follow me in real time where I'm regularly on X Spaces answering questions on X at Simon Dixon Twit. Also, in case things go wrong, we back it up on Rumble. So please follow me over on Rumble. Always remember, you are alive at one of the most interesting, sometimes exciting, sometimes scary time in financial history. You are this transition. I want as many people on the right side of this change. Some are going to get hurt. Others are going to do really well. And I hope, at least for us, we can do this with peace, love, and unity. But I'm just telling you the world as I see it and how you can adjust to it. I'll see you for this time next week for the Iran war week 4. And we'll see what happened in the next phase of the escalation cycle, what I got wrong, what I got right, and whether we're directionally still moving in this direction. Enjoy the interview. Peace. The people that rule the world are not in the Epstein files. The people that rule the world are the people that control the Epstein files and strategically released it in order to purge some of their liabilities and also keep everyone on track to this transition to a multipolar world. We are in a transitional theater. And by theater, I mean the bombs are real, the deaths are real, the casualties are real, but the outcome has been scripted, subject to two factions of power trying to get more power. Humans aren't really a part of the equation. Like, if they could have no humans and just AI and robotics, they'll take it.
It does feel like we're in some game. It's just a game. It feels like an art. Do you remember Risk?
I do, yeah.
It just feels like Risk.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think we're all feeling that right now. The real pandemic is the psychological trauma that we're all being put through.
My big issue is, what do you do if you're not in that position, which is the large majority of the population?
There'll be a bigger print than COVID. It's the only strategy. Fixed assets is the way to solve that. And we enter into a world where your government might confiscate your assets, or they might tax your assets in order to stop you from leaving. And so everyone just needs to work on the sovereign side. That's solvable. And you need a 10-year plan to do that, and you need to start today.
Simon, hi, how are you?
All right, I'm glad to be back.
Yeah, glad to have you back. We recorded back in January. It was an interesting show. I didn't quite imagine it would be as popular as it was. In the top 5 shows we've ever made in 10 years of podcasting. I had lots of people reach out to me, send me private messages saying this is blowing my mind. You described in that interview the global debt-based financial system that ultimately extracts wealth from everybody. And since then, we've had another war break out with Iran, which is having a lot of knock-on effects, a lot of fears of inflation and what's going to happen with oil prices, etc. Sovereign debt continues to explode. Living standards are getting worse. We're seeing an acceleration of AI job displacement. I saw yesterday a new website which is tracking AI job losses. So really, are we watching the end game for this financial system it's breaking, or are we just seeing another cycle and a more consolidation of power and wealth?
Yeah, absolutely. We're definitely not witnessing the end. We're seeing a consolidation of financial power, and it is transnational in nature, as we discussed last time. And so, this Iran war and what we're witnessing right now is really a refactoring of the world order. This war, I think, will definitely mark the decisive moment that we've actually transitioned to this multipolar world, as it were, that's dominated by transnational capital. And we're currently witnessing the reallocation of resources that is 100% engineered by the financial industrial complex that we talked about last time. So all of the trends are accelerating, and particularly in the West, we had a really bad situation for the average person that we discussed in the last show. Now we've got oil prices to factor into the equation. We've got rising unemployment as a result of artificial intelligence, robotics, automation, that is all being accelerated, which pushes that K-shaped economy we talked about, where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. You have those that own the assets and those that are the asset, which is the people that own the debt. And unless you know or you are connected deeply to the financial system, where you can take your debt and you can effectively leverage it at significantly favorable terms with the financial industrial complex, unless you can do that, then you're on the wrong side of financialization, securitization, and even now tokenization. And so, yeah, we're seeing an acceleration. And by breaking the financial system, we know what the end result of breaking the financial system always is. It means that you socialize the losses and privatize the gains. You engage in an asset stripping exercise where the private equity industry mops up all of the cheap assets. And then you reset to a new region of the world where the growth can reset, and you have massive flows of capital leave the host nation, where was your original predatory operation, and you flow it to other regions.
So when Trump won the last election, there was a lot of hope around Trump that he was going to drain the swamp, he was going to fix the borders, he was going to ramp up the economy, and one of his key election points was no new foreign wars. He was anti-war. He was the peace guy. And for a lot of people, they can't really understand why this war is happening, because it's hugely unpopular with the public. It's almost going to destroy the Republicans in the midterms, and almost certainly lead to the Republicans not winning the next election if it continues, it turns out to be a chaos, which it looks like it is at the moment, to be seen if it's long-term chaos. So how do people understand why Trump has done this?
Okay. So whenever I try and understand a politician's strategy, I try to think, why was that president installed and who paid for him to be installed? And so I always default back to, let's look at the top backers of Trump and the Trump administration. At the very top, you have Elon Musk, which represents the faction of corporate power in America called the technical industrial complex. That is the weaponization of algorithms and technology and data in order to build, control grids. That will be represented in artificial intelligence, social credit scores, stable coins, programmable money. X money has just been announced. You're starting to see acceleration in Palantir border controls. You're starting to see acceleration in digital IDs. You're starting to see acceleration in civil unrest campaigns to justify a technocratic Orwellian surveillance state. So that's the primary backer. That's the future industry that Trump was paid to usher through. That's represented by Genius Act, Clarity Act, Big Beautiful Bill, and significant funding for the military industrial complex in both AI and cybersecurity. The second person that Trump was backed by, the second largest contributor, was the Mellon banking family. So that represents the financial industrial complex. What does the financial industrial complex want at the moment? They want to utilize captured states, i.e. America, the collective West, let's call it, anyone that's had mass financialization and securitization and private control, in order to weaken state power over corporate financial power. And so if America gets too strong as a state, as a nationalistic entity, then financial power needs to push back and diversify. And when growth and birth rates and civil unrest are getting too disjointed to usher in this surveillance state, you diversify finances around the world. So that represents multipolarity. The financial industrial complex wants to diversify away from America, utilize America for capital markets. They've got the most liquid capital markets, but effectively the economy is a byproduct of capital markets. And it wants to send capital globally. So what happened with the Trump administration is you had tariff policy. Tariff policy was, he called it Dollar Liberation Day on April the 2nd, 2025. That was to liberate the world from the dollar. And what capital markets did is they restructured currency wars and using the dollar as the dominant currency to using capital flows through exchange traded funds and ETFs to determine which countries get access to capital using Western pension system and insurance premiums and various other things. And so Trump reset the world order that meant everybody had to renegotiate, and he was an agent of chaos. His job was to, quote unquote, take on the deep state under the name of MAGA. What that means is the deep state backs the dollar. And so covert wars, all of those mechanisms of United Nations to get away from crimes against humanity, using America's vote hosted in America, USAID, these covert mechanisms of funding Black Op operations, CIA, Mossad, MI6 operations. He started deconstructing those, which meant that it weakened the dollar. So ever since Dollar Liberation Day, you had a weakening of the dollar relative to gold, relative to silver, and relative to foreign currencies. And also other stock markets, like look how bad the UK economy is, but the UK stock market outperformed. The European stock market outperformed. The Brazilian stock market outperformed. The Asian stock market outperformed. So while America was being asset stripped so that the US stock market would go up, which was dominated by technology, which was dominated by government spending money on AI data centers. And if you take out the AI, it was very low growth in America. It was all government spending and financialized constructs to boost all this manufacturing of AI data centers. So he immediately set about for the financial industrial complex. And Trump is the most transactional president. It's so transparent because you can see all of his side deals, side investments that align with it, to strategically weaken the dollar and push capital into a multipolar world. He was also an agent of chaos in order to make China look amazing. Everybody renegotiated their contracts with a rational, stable market, which is China now, in the irony. So that's what he did for the financial industrial complex. His third backer was Mariam Edelstein. Mariam Edelstein is a big investor in Israel, and Israel is a subdivision of the military industrial complex. And so, Israel is the mechanism for agitating war in the Middle East. And so by committing to what many people framed as an Israel first policy, while you were destroying the empire, you have a plausible deniability story, which is, we're not doing this. America is ethical, but we're blackmailed by Jeffrey Epstein and Israel rules us. And therefore, when you see all these crimes against humanity, it's not us, it's them. And so the military industrial complex has this plausible deniability story, but it was the third lowest faction of funding for the Trump administration. So tech had the most influence, banking second, and military third. So what the military wanted is effectively a series of wars that they could profit from and compensation of if one war zone ends, because the finance want to invest in stability in that region, then another war starts. And so Trump started delivering upon that, which was a continuation of a uni-party policy. This isn't an attack on Trump. Trump is a puppet for real power, which is corporate power in America and across the West. So you had a continuation of the Biden administration policy, which was flood the borders. And then you had Trump coming along and saying, close the borders. Now that created all the Palantir technology, all the data. Immediately, what did he do? He created the Department of Government Efficiency. That was to get all of the data consolidated into a single database, which is managed across private interest. Palantir, Elon Musk at X, and then he put the other PayPal, all of them from South Africa, by the way. You had the whole PayPal mafia as part of the Trump administration. And then David Sachs as well. And he was there to get Genius Act, Clarity Act, and make sure that these data centers and AI data centers were all funded. They created a bit of a Ponzi scheme through the credit markets that's having some stress right now. And it was also funded with Gulf sovereign wealth money, which is why we're having stress in those markets right now. So Trump is the perfect illustration of how the power dynamics of the empire work. And so obviously all of that's going to be a disappointment because it means that the asset holder gets wealthier. Because finance is number one, they control the US military. So Trump's job is to put an acceptable narrative in front of why this finance wants war. And so if finance wants to go get Venezuelan oil, Trump has to find a narrative. So he makes up some stuff around drugs and things like that, even though the CIA drug cartels are 100% part of this deep state. They'll never, you can't stop drugs unless you get the demand side. The supply side is built into the government.
So initially on Venezuela, when I saw it, having been to Venezuela, knowing Venezuelans, seeing them so happy that Maduro's gone, I had this kind of like weak hope that this was really an opportunity to kind of restore, bring some hope back to Venezuela because it's desperate what happens there. Maduro goes, is it the brother or the sister gets elected?
Rodriguez, some
relation.
Yeah.
Nothing changes, but since then we've seen a gold deal being done. And as soon as I saw the gold deal, I just thought of Simon Dixon. I was like, well, this explains everything. Yeah. Somebody wanted the gold.
Yeah. So Venezuela was part of this multipolar world. So, what the big finance and the financial industrial complex want at this time? I'll just say, for simplicity, FIC, MIC, and TIC, technical industrial complex, military industrial complex, financial industrial complex. Those are the three main factions of power. And obviously you've got media, which serves all interest as well by creating fake narratives to make people think something else is happening. But one of the things that the FIC wants is to box America as a nationalistic state into the Western Hemisphere, dominate it, asset strip the entire West, and also potentially prop up Eurodollar through NATO spending. So you've got to create an environment where Germany, UK, France, Israel, America, those are the five captured governments that make up the military industrial complex. Those governments print money and make sure it is spent into the stock market to prop up BAE Systems, Palantir, all of the different, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamic, Elbit Systems, Raytheon, all of these different companies. And they need a brochure because at the moment, if they're going to box this military in that finance controls, they need to control all of the resources that currently the military is dependent upon China for. And so that's the rare earth minerals, that's the commodities, that's the energy, oil, and all of those things. And so they needed to turn Europe into a complete subordinate dependency, which is where it is right now, just being asset stripped for American corporate interest and the stock markets in general. And then they needed to make up all the gaps between all the rare earth minerals components. But they also needed continual war, because if the war's going to remove from other regions, it needs to come back home. And so the only way in a contained structure where the US military used to dominate the entire world and create terrorism around the whole world, is that they can only do it at home. So that's why you had this whole open border, closed border, demographic, weaponization of religion, algorithms to drive people into more radical behavior, all of the civil unrest campaigns that we've witnessed, we've seen there. And so Venezuela was not regime change, not taking on drugs. It was keep the regime that was negotiated with world leaders. And so prior to Venezuela, China moved all of its oil. Prior to Venezuela, Russia was changing its interest. Prior to Venezuela, Iran was changing its strategy as well. So you could see all the oil tankers knew that this was about to happen. And there was no reaction from Iran, no reaction from China, and no reaction from Russia. We saw the same in Syria. When there's no reaction from world powers, it means world powers agreed. And so when world powers had agreed, we're going to give America access to all of these resources. They can dollarize the economy through some kind of stable coin. They can destroy the Venezuelan currency, do a currency crash, which was the precursor to Iran as well. And then you can just basically extract all the resources. And that makes up the Western Hemisphere and the new order of America as the dominant force, only for private corporate interests, not for the American people, not for the European people, not for the Venezuelan people, not for the Canadians, not for anyone. And so that region is fully captured. It was a very successful operation, and Maduro, my speculation is, agreed to it because, Maduro, if you look at what happened, immediately the Venezuelan stock market went up 300%. That's controlled by a few banks and financial institutions and elites. It's not like across the Venezuelan people. So the stock market did incredibly well. Either Maduro was betrayed by his underparts and the whole structure remained, or Maduro was okay with it and allowed it to happen. We get a Hollywood movie around how amazing America is. They had to do this, operation that was very sophisticated. Nobody, there wasn't large deaths. And so America got its Hollywood movie brochure to give to the MAGA, and the MAGA started feeling great about war. We're like, hey, great, we're going to make America great again. We got our oil.
This was a brochure for Iran.
Yeah. It was a brochure. Well, it was a brochure for Iran so that MAGA could think maybe the same will happen again in Iran. And so they're thinking, in, out, very successful operation. No one had to die. And it's, they got they got the control. But the only reason it was like that was because Russia, China, and Iran effectively decided to forego some of those assets in some of their region. So it was very easy. While America is incredibly weak right now, you get a public display of strength. So what does Trump need? He needs, he changed it to the Department of War. Okay. He gave a display that we're not the war. We don't do the forever war. We're not the neocons like Biden and Clinton and all those people. We're let's go get our shit. America's going to dominate. When really it's shrinking down and it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller in terms of its sphere of influence. And so that gives the perfect narrative. And there was nobody, Trump was perfect for the job. He'll lie about everything. And he's got a cult following. It's getting smaller and smaller because of the Epstein files and the war and various other things. So, but now all he does is he just tweets on Truth Social to the dumbest demographic in America. His rhetoric is getting so ridiculous that he's talking to the cult following only. The Q-tard, the person that believes to trust the plan.
Can we put up that Chamath video? I want you to see this. So I saw this right after our interview, and I was like, okay.
Men that run the world, period, full stop. They control most of the important assets. They control the money flows. And these are not the tech entrepreneurs. Now, they are going to get rolled over the next 5 to 10 years by the people that are really underneath pulling the strings. And when you get behind the curtain and see how that world works, what you realize is it is unfairly set up for them and their progeny. Now, I'm not going to say that that's something that we can rip apart, but first order of business is I want to break through and be at that table. That's the first order of business. And the way that I do that is by proving that I can do what they do as well as they do it. And then do it better than how they do it. Because at the end of the day, they are commercial fucking animals. Okay? And they'll open the door out of curiosity and they'll let me stay because I add value. And then once I'm there, I can open the door for other people who can try to do the same thing. So my entire goal now is to be in a position to aggregate enough of the capital of the world to then reallocate it against my worldview. And I'm not saying my worldview is the best or right, but it is mine. And at the end of the day, there are 150 other fucking guys with their worldview, and they don't give a shit what you think about their fucking worldview. That's the truth. And so why not me? Why not? Why not one of you? Why not? And so in my life now, I'm just kind of like, why not?
I mean, I've got so many thoughts on that video. I mean, firstly, he's just told us how the world runs there. And I believe him because he is close to all of the tech entrepreneurs, all the investors. He's close to the money flow. And so when he tells me 150 people run the world, he's telling me what you told me, but it's no longer a conspiracy. It's one of the guys who's connected that's telling me that. So I'm like, okay, everything that sounds like a conspiracy theory, everything that you said, well, some people are like, well, Simon's just a conspiracy theorist. It's like, no, this is literally how the world works. Like, this is it. So that's my first point. And then my second point is like, well, hold on a second. Like, is this just hubris from him? Or does he think, I don't like the way the world is. If I can accumulate enough capital, I can get in there and try and make the world a better place? Or is he just consumed by the idea of power and just wants to be one of the guys? I've so many thoughts on it.
Yeah. So, this whole concept of there's a bunch of people that, the governments are subordinate to that power structure. I think it's really a representation that helps us understand this is the Epstein files. The people that rule the world are not in the Epstein files. The people that rule the world are the people that control the Epstein files and strategically released it in order to purge some of their liabilities and also keep everyone on track to this transition to a multipolar world. If you want to know who controls the Epstein files and who actually is involved in those operations, you need the financial transactions, and those exist at the bank. And so JP Morgan, Bank of New York Mellon, they're currently engaged in, court cases, which they will win because they were the ones that settled with the victims of the Epstein files, whether it was Deutsche Bank or JP Morgan, 180, I think it was 285 million settlement, and there was multiple settlements. But the financial transactions tell you the whole story. And if you were to get those financial transactions, you would find that there are certain jurisdictions that have a banking network of money laundering that will tell you the full story of how the world works. And they don't want you to know how the world works because the governments are in it as well. And so it exists pretty much as a money laundering network that profits from sex trafficking, humans trafficking, weapons trafficking, and drug trafficking. That is a compromised network that ensures that it doesn't get exposed because everyone that tries to climb it has to be compromised. And if you, and you have to also be leveraged, your wealth has to be leveraged. So Trump's wealth, his net worth is leveraged. He had to rise in New York through the mafia cartels, and therefore, if your net worth consists of borrowing against your stock, collateralized loans, equity, and it's not real cash, real hard assets, then it is connected to compliance with this power network as well. So everyone's leveraged either financially or through compromise. And you'll find that there is a network of banks and financial institutions. JP Morgan's certainly involved in that. And you find jurisdictional arbitrage. One of the jurisdictions is the City of London that sits within London. And that is, if the king wants to enter the City of London, he needs permission. This was left over from, some of these colonial conquest historical things. There is the Bank for International Settlements, which it's a building in Switzerland that has its own army, its own police, and its own law as a building. It is the Vatican, and the Vatican is where you have the banking money laundering networks. And then you have Israel, which is a jurisdiction for many of these mafia and crimes against humanity and testing completely illegal military technologies on a Palestinian laboratory and in Africa, and many of the drug testing, many of these things. And so as you rise, you're compromised. The laundering happens through the Vatican Bank, and then you have different nodes in the network that prop this up. At the top of that, because you can control capital, you can subordinate a country's military. So that's why I say, when I think of the US military, that's not the US military that's acting in America's national interest. That's the US military that the financial industrial complex can command to go get them some resources, or reset relationships and trade routes and strategic choke points.
But there are people, therefore, who want this war with Iran, with the consequences of people dying. We've had 200 kids killed in a Tomahawk attack, on top of the other countless couple of thousand deaths we've had, chaos across the region, just because they like the smell of money.
Humans aren't really a part of the equation. Like, if they could have no humans and just AI and robotics, they'll take it. It's a bit like a company. A company, if a company has its fantasy, right, it doesn't want to deal with HR, it doesn't want to deal with humans, because their headaches, their problems, they call in sick. There's all these things. A corporate that's maximizing for its shareholders, if it could maximize profit by having no humans, it would. And the same is with these sovereign networks as well. These corporate captured. And so if a country is still sovereign, they've got its own resources, it's got its own central bank, it's got its own, it's able to negotiate with this network. But the network has captured the countries. They don't care about humans. Like, they're the same people that are willing to take down 2 towers in order to create a justification and narrative for war. These are the same people that have probably killed, through the British Empire, French, American, European empires, and the American Empire, 300 million deaths, I'd say. Like some studies and estimates have put out there, in order to fight wars for mercantile acquisition of resources. And they have, if you need leverage, then are they willing to blow up a school in Iran with 6 to 12-year-old girls in order to have a narrative that justifies part of an operation? Well, one theory could be it could be an accident. The other could be a false flag. So then you have to ask who benefits from that.
But it's also evil. Like,
Yes. It's evil because everyone is, again, you can look at it as these fully sovereign, autonomous people that engage in evil, or you can look at it as a mafia and a compromise network where you either provide value to the network or you die, or you're called a pedophile, or your photos come out about the sick things you did, or you don't get access to capital, or they destroy your net worth, or they use the media in order to tarnish your career. So everybody that is in the network that has gone too far may, and that's why they end up in drugs and doing really crazy things, like where they end up so degenerate that they end up with crazy pedophilia or something like that, because this is not a nice place to be. These aren't happy people. Evil is not a natural state of being. I believe humans are naturally good. But this is how the network works. That's how power works.
So why exactly is there a war with Iran now? What's your take on this?
Okay. So once you understand this, you have to see beyond the sovereign state. Most people think that Iran, US, and Israel are in a war right now. I would say we are in a transitional theater. And by theater, I mean the bombs are real, the deaths are real, the casualties are real. But the outcome has been scripted, subject to two factions of power trying to get more power. And those two factions of power have a different vision for the world. One is the American nationalistic military-industrial complex that is kind of location-based. And then there's transnational capital, the FIC. They have, I believe, negotiated an operation that is in line with this multipolar world order. So then you have to dig deep and look into what are the factions of power. So most people think of Iran as a monolith. Iran's not a monolith. This is where people get things wrong. I personally believe the best way of understanding the world is through CIA declassified documents. And one of those which really helps you understand this is the Iran-Contra affair.
Yeah, I remember.
So in the Iran-Contra affair, it's just a brief recap. You had that banking network, which was Credit Suisse, that was laundering all of these weapon trafficking and money networks. And this was during the 1979 Iranian Revolution. Prior to this, Iran was effectively a playground for British Petroleum. And 80% of the revenue of Iran's oil went to BP, and 20% was left back for Iran. Now, when they had a democracy, and when they were thinking about nationalizing their oil, America and the British Empire, CIA and Mossad, created Operation Ajax. And Operation Ajax was where they engineered exactly what you just saw leading up to this: protests, deaths. They were, Mossad or MI6 and CIA at this time. They were just killing people. They were saying, that's you. They were doing sanctions and to try and get civil unrest, creating economic strife, destroying the currency, killing their savings. And then they replaced the democracy with the Shah, because the Shah, is somebody that you can control. So the more dictator and authoritarian it is, the easier it is in order to control that. So they'll say that. So you had all this history. And then eventually it leads to Khamenei, which was the previous Ayatollah. He was in exile in France. And in 1979, there was a hostage operation that led to a negotiation where effectively there was a swap for the hostages for weapons, and Iran being complicit in engaging in some of these weapons trafficking routes. And so we had this very theatrical creation of a new narrative, which is they're doing it for religious reasons, is the Islamist terrorist. And so they come in, you had the Iranian Revolution, and immediately there was a war between Iraq and Iran. Iraq, Saddam Hussein, which was a CIA puppet, effectively, he was given chemical weapons to throw on Iran. And Iran was given weapons from Israel. So the IRGC, the Iranian Revolution, was receiving weapons from Israel. That's how this started. So America created an operation. Europeans, allowed the Khamenei to come back from exile. We don't know what blackmail networks or anything happened in those things. But the Iran-Contra affair was effectively America sending the money to Israel, Israel purchasing the weapons from US military contractors, sending them over to the Revolutionary Guard, the IRGC, and the Iranian, the Iranian thing. And then they would use their weapons trafficking networks to get it back to Central and South America via Nicaragua, in order to fund Contra militias that were protecting drug trafficking rings for the CIA and America. So when you understand that, you realize that Israel, and again, this is a faction of power that comes from that. This isn't the whole country. This isn't the government. This is a transnational structure that's set up where many people believe that they're for something else. They're working for something else, but they don't know who their boss is. Let's say it's 150 people. Most people don't know who that is. So you have these segregated structures that make people. Now, religion is the best way of building an army. If you're in an ideological war, it's a lot easier to recruit an army. It's why it's very hard for Britain to have an army right now, because everyone's looking at Keir Starmer saying, "You're corrupt. I don't want to work for you." I don't even see Britain as something that is doing good in the world right now. We seem to be an Epstein pedophilia ring that's bloody, that seems to be creating wars around the world. So there's no ideology. There's no like, I'm fighting for my country and God asked me to do it.
Yeah.
But there are places in the world where that still exists, right? And Iran is one of those. A holy war, I'm doing this to combat Western imperialism. That's an easy one to recruit. Israel is an easy one to recruit an army. I'm doing it for the protection of the Jewish people that are in a fight for their, survival after thousands of years of Christian persecution in Europe. But then you pretend it's the Muslims that were doing it, right? So then you have this whole, the Jews versus the Muslims narrative. So anyway, the Iran-Contra affair set up strategic tension between Israel, Iran, and you realize that there's a faction of power where the US, Iran, and Israel are all working together. That faction of power is, again, by the way, everyone's going to be pissed off. Everyone in the comments is going to be pissed off for this, because there's kind of cartoon versions of Iran, and like both of them are wrong. One cartoon version of Iran is the Western version, which is you've got the center of terrorism, cut off the head of the snake. They want to kill, death to America, death to Israel. They're Islamist terrorists. People don't know the difference between ISIS and Hezbollah or something like that. Just this confused thinking that they were a part of 9/11, just complete ignorance, like cartoon image of an evil Hitler, basically, a neo-evil Hitler. On the other side, you have the complete opposite of that. You have the cartoon image that the IRGC are in the last holy war against Western imperialism, and we're the defenders of the Palestinian cause, and we are worthy, ideologically driven, in order to protect suppression from Israel and America. And so that is a cartoon image that some people have. What is reality is the IRGC is actually just an asset management company. They run certain assets. Those assets are banking assets, weapons trafficking operations, and really what's called the resistance economy, I like to call it. It's an economy where if you can find a cause and you can fund a militarized group in order to defend that cause, you have leverage in negotiating and trying to become a hegemon in the industry, in the region, rather. So in the region of the Middle East, you have various groups that have done this. You have Western interests represented by Israel, Al-Qaeda, and ISIS that were created via co-opting Saudi Arabia and some of the Gulf countries in order to build terrorist factories that would then create chaos, and then Iran would build a resistance against it. So then you had, in the case of Yemen, the Houthis, in the case of Gaza, Hamas, in the case of Lebanon, you had Hezbollah. And then you have this ginormous industry that profits from this strategic tension. And then you have Israel that builds out its network as well. It's all about conquest of resources. The IRGC is effectively an asset management institution, and it sits above the Iranian government. And so you have this substructure that has an economy built upon continual resistance. Now, when interests align, when Israel is a node for this military-industrial complex, Iran creates the counter-narrative then it makes sense, right? Why you have death to America, death to Israel.
Yeah.
Because for 40 years, they're about to get a nuclear bomb and they're about to kill the Jews. It never actually happens. It's all done via proxy and conquest of resources and land and territory that gives you negotiation leverage in trying to become a hegemon. You have Saudi doing the same in Libya, in UAE doing the same in Libya and in Sudan and various others. And you have this whole model that is built upon strategic tension at all times in order to acquire resources, ensure the Middle East can never unify around their resources, and just profiteer from the $10 trillion that America printed on their fake war on terror that they engineered. And so when you look at what is the Iran war right now, you have what changed, and this is the key thing. There were several things that changed that now why we need an Iran war, because for 40 years, Iran and Israel were never firing at each other. But it was only in the last 2 years when they actually started firing at each other, because they needed to end the strategic tension. Why are we now getting the end of strategic tension? Why has that operation ended now? Well, a few things changed. Firstly, the financial industry, the FIC, put China in the equation to build its its manufacturing base, and so that was done via the World Trade, Organization, and allowing China into the World Trade Organization. What that did is it created an environment where America would become more financialized and securitized, where 70% of its whole economy was no longer a manufacturing base, it's service-based, with the largest being financial services. And that would mean that you can always push the currency up in order to get all the countries where you destroy their currencies and destroy their economies to lend it back to the US government via the bond market. And so you would have effectively the IMF destroying countries and servicing loans. And then those countries would have to lend it back to the US government. And because you're always bidding up the dollar is strategically overvalued at all times. That means you hollow out the manufacturing base because it's too expensive to build shit. So the military starts outsourcing a lot of its components to China, because China's doing the opposite, is strategically weakening its currency. So everything's getting cheaper. So they can export while America imports. And so this whole globalization, which was represented by the World Economic Forum and corporate interest, effectively was about strengthening the dollar, weakening the yuan, and building a ginormous manufacturing base in China, and making America just a collateralized debt obligation that's fully financialized and securitized. Eventually, you know that if you weaken that dollar, you reverse the trade.
Yes.
And if China strengthens the yuan, then it becomes less competitive. So you're able to re-collaborate. And now we're at those extremes where the US military, this is how you know everything's fake. This is, well, again, real, but theatrical. America's nuclear program imports highly enriched uranium from Russia. The US military industrial complex cannot produce an F-35 fighter jet or anything without China. So the American military and nuclear program is 100% reliant upon China and Russia. So are we really going to World War III? I don't think so, because if there was real nation states fighting each other, China could kill the US military in a second just by stopping the exports. Immediately, gone. And if you've put them in a war with Ukraine and put them in a war with Iran and put them in a war everywhere, the military companies have made loads of sales, but the national security of America is compromised. What does that mean? You are now subordinate to corporate interests. So you're hollowing out and asset stripping. So when you look about this, what is the Iran war? I believe that because America got so controlled by the FIC, and China became the manufacturing base, America did something in the Trump administration, which is it became energy independent. So remember, many of the wars in the Middle East were about propping up this petrodollar. If you price oil in dollars, you create artificial demand for dollars, and then Saudi pegs its currency to the dollar, and so you have to buy treasuries and lend it to the US government. And then they use that influence to build military bases across and say, we're protecting the oil. But, and then you get to say, well, America protects us because we effectively cooperate with America in propping up the petrodollar. So you have that relationship there. Now, if America becomes energy independent, now what? The petrodollar breaks and the currency pegs break. And now America is competing with the Gulf countries. So what's that military base for? Why do you need that military base? And why is the price of gold going up like crazy right now? Oh, because they're selling their dollars, stopping lending it to the US government, and buying gold, because they're not going to buy their own currency. They can print their own currency. So they buy gold. And so the gold price, basically, we're breaking the petrodollar. The Bank of Japan comes out and starts increasing rates. That breaks the Japan carry trade. The NATO comes along and America starts saying, we're no longer, we don't want war, you want war. That breaks the euro dollar and all these things. And so if you put all this together, you've ended up in a situation where, okay, so what did the Gulf countries do? They're saying, right, we're now competing with America for our energy. We're competing with Russia for our energy. Where are we getting our wealth from right now? Oh, well, we're selling our oil to the country that doesn't have oil, China. And so China's buying all of this energy from Russia, from Iran, from the Gulf countries, from Venezuela, from anyone, because it's got the world's manufacturing base. It needs every type of energy. It needs solar panels, it needs wind farms, it needs renewable energy. And, that whole ESG thing that destroyed the European manufacturing base, that was BlackRock's ESG to sell Chinese windmills to Europe, to turn off their nuclear energy, blow up Nord Stream pipeline, stop the gas getting in, and destroy Europe so they can acquire it on the cheap. And so America's now an energy exporter. It competes with the Gulf. The Gulf are looking at this saying, we've got US bases. We're not propping up the petrodollar. In fact, we're now having to sell our gold to prop up the dollar peg because the dollar's weakening. We don't want to sell our gold in order to prop up the dollar. We prop up our currency. Everything's breaking. And so what did transnational capital, what did the FIC do? Well, it co-opted the sovereign wealth funds of the world. And it said, every deal we invest in, you can also invest in. When we buy XAI, when we buy ChatGPT, when we fund all these things, you can be involved in every single deal. And we'll kill Nord Stream pipeline, and in Qatar, you can get all the liquefied natural gas contracts. We'll take some of them. America will take some of them. Qatar, you'll get some of them. Okay. So now you've got a Middle East that effectively Iran depends upon China, America depends upon China, Russia depends upon China, the Gulf countries depend upon China, the world depends upon China. And so now what are you going to do? Well, China is influencing the sovereign wealth funds because those sovereign wealth funds get their money from selling oil to China. So they're saying, I want this. I want a de-dollarized world in the Middle East. I want peace in the Middle East. I want people to buy our product. I don't want war. I don't want militias. I don't want all of this stuff. So I'll fund Iran and influence Iranian politics. I'll fund the Gulf sovereign wealth funds and influence Middle Eastern politics. I'll fund Russia, and influence Russian politics. And together, we'll build a Belt and Road Initiative where we invest in Africa, we invest in the Middle East, we invest across Asia, and we undo the IMF and the Western colonialism. Not because we're competing with America, but because the financial industrial complex want the same thing and they own America. And so this transition to a multipolar world is those all regional powers. There is no resistance against it, but there is one faction of resistance. So you've got this financial industrial complex, transnational capital. There is one faction of resistance against that. That's an ideological narrative that they built up to justify war. What's that represented in? It's represented in nationalistic neocon narrative in America, where America is the best, America's the greatest, the dollar is the strength, we win, we kick ass, let's go get war, you do it or not. You need to destroy that narrative and that faction of power, or you need to compensate the military companies somehow. Then you've got the other factions of power, the Zionists in Israel. You know, that justified all that war. And then there's one more narrative, the IRGC at the top level and the resistance economy. So you need to take out all the militia groups, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, Hamas, all of them, all of the ones that are done. You need to also get rid of the US military bases from the Gulf countries. You also need to have an Iran that is run as a government aligned with China, but not an IRGC that profits from war. Now, that faction of power is part of those mafia networks as well. You know, all those mafia networks. So now, what is this war? This war is the agreed outcome between the military-industrial complex and the financial-industrial complex, because China is now wants regional stability and Trump wants to take credit for it. That's what this is.
What?
Yeah. So what has happened since the war's gone on? So let's have a look at
Hold on. So, right. Can you re-summarize that in one paragraph?
Yes. You have the military-industrial complex, the MIC, that is aligned with hardliners in the IRGC in Iran, the Zionist hardliners in Israel, and they profit from the forever war model. Okay? Then you have the financial industrial complex, the FIC, that wants regional stability. They partner with Gulf sovereign wealth funds, they partner with China, and they partner with the reformist, pragmatic government in Iran. The reformist, pragmatic government in Iran was sat at a table negotiating with America. Oman was mediating the talks. One day prior to the American strikes on Friday, Oman made an announcement. It said Iran has agreed, the IRGC has agreed, zero nuclear enrichment. Highly enriched uranium will be guaranteed with Russia. China will provide security guarantees for the removal of certain ballistic missiles. That set the framework. And who was sat around the table? The Iranian government and the more modest parts of the IRGC. I believe the negotiation continued, and part of the negotiation was America strike on Saturday, take out these people. Iran, you blow up the US military bases, and then we'll close the Strait of Hormuz. And when we close the Strait of Hormuz, we'll create a crisis in oil that sets a time frame and a deadline. And who benefited from the closure of Hormuz? Who benefited? American oil tycoons, the FIC, that have now said, hey, guess what? We blew up Nord Stream pipeline, Europe. You don't have any liquefied natural gas, and you've got high oil costs. It just so happens that there was tax policy that created windfall tax on the North Sea oil in the UK. All right, so now coincidentally, all the oil industries in carnage. So Norwegian sovereign wealth fund is filling in the gap, and then what happened? Europe negotiated with Qatar. So Qatar said, "Here's your liquefied natural gas." What was the first target they hit? They hit the production of liquefied natural gas in Qatar. They did the US military bases and the liquefied natural gas production in Qatar. Europe's in disaster. America comes along and says, right, They know what the time frame of how long the Strait of Hormuz is going to be closed, the financial industrial complex. Why? Because it was the insurers that did it. Insurance said 75% premium on all shipments. So the insurers, with the factions of power in Iran, shut the Strait of Hormuz. America comes along and says, we're going to sign probably negotiating right now, a 20-year fixed-term agreement to provide liquefied natural gas to Europe, to UK, and we'll take that contract. Qatar, screw you. Russia, screw you. This is ours. What did Russia do? Russia said, oh, by the way, we can get liquefied natural gas and oil everywhere. Who wants it? So China gets it. India gets it. All the Asian countries that went into crisis because Japan needs to import all of its oil. South Korea. So you had a crash of the South Korean stock market, the Japanese stock market. The American stock market was kind of okay because it was propped up by energy companies and military stocks. But you effectively, who was won from the closure of Strait of Hormuz? Russia. And America and American oil interests. So now,
because they've said they're going to remove the sanctions on Russian exports as well, right?
What else did you get to do? All right, those military bases in the Gulf countries, blow them up. So Iran blew them up and targeted them. They didn't touch the Gulf countries; they touched the US bases, and all of the diplomacy was around Iran saying, we are not attacking you. We are expelling US from the region. They also said, anybody that wants to get their shipment through to the Strait of Hormuz, you just need to do two things. You need to remove your Israeli embassy and your US embassy, and the Hormuz is open for you. And so they are effectively expelling the US from the region for China. And so now you get the US military bases. What are those Gulf countries going to do? What did they immediately do in reaction? They didn't bomb Iran. They didn't retaliate militarily. They said, we will protect ourselves. And so they're depleting their interceptors that they bought from American military. So now Iran is depleting. Israel is depleting, is targeting Israel. Israel's having to blow up all of its defense. Every bomb makes a shit ton of money. All of this makes, this is billions and billions of dollars. So Israel gets weaker and weaker and gets burdened with debt. The stock market in Israel does really well because it's military based. Then you have the weakening of the US bases in the military. And effectively, what have you done? What is the end result of this going to be? The end result is that the Strait will open. Oil prices reset the world order. You have you have a series of mechanisms that are being announced. And what was the main mechanism when the price of oil, by the way, $115 kills, that's global financial crisis if you have $115 oil for a sustained period of time. What was the mechanism to push the price of oil down? Sanctions relief for Russia. So they announced sanction relief for Russia and the price of oil crashes.
Kills me.
The G7, they say we're going to release our strategic petroleum reserves.
400 million barrels, right?
Yeah, that's 3.7 days of global oil trade. So it's insignificant, but you drain the G7 of their strategic petroleum reserves. Most of it will come from America. So you drain the strategic petroleum reserves. You have to replenish all your military. You have to replenish all your oil and your strategic reserves, and your bank. This is it. Now, what is the end result? Is that effectively, if you think of where did the term Middle East come from? The term Middle East came from the British colonial empires, where Britain was looking eastwards and saying this is the middle of the world, and we need their oil. So the Middle East was a colonial term, but it was originally West Asia. The Middle East is now becoming West Asia again, and so you've built the Western Hemisphere dominated by American corporate interest. Transnational capital can rent the American military whenever they need an operation. You've destroyed all the proxy networks in the Middle East. Strategic tension ends by the end of this. IRGC, if any of those hardliners weren't on board with China's plan, they're the ones that would be derailing the plan. Any of those hardliners in Israel may be trying to derail the plan. Any of those hardliners in America, the neocons, may be trying to derail the plan. You push them all out, they try and derail the plan. They kill schools, children in schools. They blow up, they try and get Saudi Arabia to retaliate. They start doing false flags all across and say, that's Iran, that's Iran. And so now you're having the dismantling of all the false flag operations and decapitation campaigns of anyone that wouldn't have been on board the plan. You replace Khamenei with Khamenei. And Khamenei, who was cooperating, I believe, and negotiating, probably agrees to a regime change. I don't know the details of that, but it's not a regime change because you can't destroy Iran. If you literally did a real regime change, it would the region would be in chaos. This is Syria with 90 million people, one of the most extensive military mights in the world. You can't do that. All of the protests were 100% manufactured. Like you don't have a revolution where the people uprise and then take over one of the largest militaries in the world. That only happens if you have an alternative military and the military goes with the revolutionaries, and then you have a coup. There was no coup. There was no army. It was just literally kill the currency, which Scott Percent admitted to. Lindsey Graham said Mossad were on the streets. You create economic circumstances, which are a disaster, so destroy all their savings. Get an internet blackout, and what do I think IRGC were doing? They were probably arresting and taking out the hardliners in their own internal system that were not on board with the plan. And so then you outsource to Israel and America decapitation campaigns, take out the people that are not on board the plan, destroy, have real bad damage on Israel, and then you have a three-way narrative at the end of it. So oil puts a time frame. You can tell this is fake because right now, if this was real, not only would you have an increase in the price of oil, but gold would be soaring as well. Gold's not soaring right now. Gold's been flat, if not down, while oil's rising. That means the insiders in the market know that there's a time frame on this war and it's not a forever war. If this was going to blow up the Middle East, gold would be going through the roof and oil would be going through the roof in sync. It's not. So there's going to be an offboard and everyone needs a three-way narrative. Israel needs to say, we did the decapitation campaigns, we chopped off the head of the snake. Meanwhile, it's burdened with debt and it's got less military, all degraded. The Gulf countries will renegotiate those contracts with some American, some China, most Russia and China. In terms of those bases probably won't be rebuilt for American interest. America's now an energy exporter. It gets Europe, it gets Central and South America. And then what did the Gulf countries do in their retaliation? They said, we're reconsidering our investments in the US. Trump said, we've got 18 trillion investment, 18 trillion. Foreign direct investment means you're acquiring the assets of America so you can leverage America. And so they said, we're going to rethink those. What were those, the ones they're going to rethink? Those were mainly defense and artificial intelligence. That's what all the investment was. They said, we're going to rethink it. That creates a problem with the AI trade in America. You get a correction of the market. You get the private credit market blowing up.
What's the timescale on all this?
Exactly. What is happening in April? In April is the China summit, which is a meeting between President Trump and Xi Jinping. It will be done by April, is my prediction.
April.
Yeah. So in that meeting will be the official you'll probably need you'll need a Hollywood movie from Trump. Trump needs a Hollywood movie. So he will probably do something similar to the 12-Day War, where he had Operation Midnight Hammer. He came in with the B-52 bomber, America looking like the king of the world, comes along, strategically takes out some of the highly enriched uranium. If you remember, the Bitcoin mining crashed by like 25% when that happened. And then you get the theater, you get the movie, and we retreated. We took out Khamenei. He'll have his narrative of MAGA. MAGA will be happy because they're like, yeah, you're not the neocon. You're not doing the forever war. You're not doing Afghanistan. You're not doing Iraq. You're not doing that anymore. Israel will have, we decapitated. Netanyahu will be regime change this year. He'll be gone. It will be, a GCC and Turkey aligned puppet government in Israel that's no longer funded by US military. Okay. And Iran will be fully online with China's plan. I guarantee you in the next few years, there will be gas pipelines between the Gulf countries and Iran. Iran won't have sanctions. And Iran will open up its economy to, and probably what they're negotiating over now is the FIC probably in a new multipolar world wants some private corporate interest in the Strait of Hormuz so that IRGC don't have full autonomy to close it again. And they'll try and get some strategic ports. BlackRock will end up with some kind of deal from that. And we'll end up where the massive amount of money that can be made from deals in Iran, deals in Syria, deals in Lebanon, deals in the Gulf countries, deals across Saudi. It will be the highest growth opportunity in the world. And they will sit between a falling US empire, which is increasingly vassalized, and a rising China that's building out Africa. And why do they need Africa? It's the only one that's still having children right now. They need the birth rates. So you put everyone else in AI, robotics, and police state, so you can deal with all the civil unrest that comes from it. So if you are now losing your primary source of profit, which was war in the Middle East, you need civil unrest within Europe, but not where it affects the stock market, just where it extracts wealth and extracts more resources. But we can't have absolute chaos. So we need Palantir. We need a police and surveillance state. We need digital ID. We need central bank digital currencies. What else did happen? Taiwan, this is interesting. What happened during this war? They said in order to preserve energy, Thailand, sorry. In order to preserve energy, everyone needs to stay at home, work from home. The pandemic narrative ain't going to work again. So now they've created another one. In order to preserve energy costs, please everyone stay at home. We need to save energy while we deal with this crisis.
Do you know simulation theory?
I haven't looked into it too much, but I'm aware of it.
Yeah, the premise that we've gone since the invention of computers to now over really decades, really, that you've gone from a computer that can do basic math to be able to create worlds like Fortnite. Give it another 100 years, you'll be able to probably recreate human existence, the world that we live in, as a simulation. That's the thesis. And if you can do it, you do it thousands and millions of times. So we're probably in a simulation. It does feel like we're in some game. It's just a game. It feels like an art. Do you remember Risk?
I do, yeah.
It just feels like Risk.
Yeah. I completely agree, and I think we're all feeling that right now. So on the psychological level, getting down to the micro, the humanitarian cost of this is an absolute pandemic. The real pandemic is the psychological trauma that we're all being put through.
Are you feeling it?
Oh, 100%.
I feel it.
My world is not the same world that I understood or knew, and
How certain are you in your thesis here?
I'm not certain on the detail. I could get lots of details wrong in that, but I'm certain on how the world is governed. Now,
sorry, Simon. For me, at my age, it seems like I'm trying to make sense of it. Is it bad timing for me, or has it always been like this?
It's always been like this. You're just
but is it collapsing now?
You're just in the wrong region of the world, because what you're experiencing right now is 1% of what people experienced on the wrong side of these bombs. You're getting the tamed down version, and we're all going crazy, right? We're all like becoming absolute nuts, and we can't have children, and we're all going crazy, right? the rest of the world has been on the wrong side of these bombs. We're only getting 10% of what they got. And they survived, and they were strong at the end of it, and they're still here.
Up until about a year ago, I'd spent my entire adult life as a hardcore entrepreneur, creating businesses and creating the podcast and the football club. Over the last 6, 7, 8 months, I've lost all my motivation to do any of it. I love doing this, and I love my football club, but I've sold my bar, and there was part of me that was kind of like politically revolutionary. I can get involved in politics and fix the problems of the country, and I go through waves of feeling like a revolutionary and other waves of thinking, what's the fucking point? But during that period, I had like blood tests, and I went to the doctors. There's nothing wrong with me. And I've noticed it around me as well. I think there's a deep psychological trauma in this country that is coming to fruition now. And I think the country itself is depressed. Yeah. And I'm trying to make sense of it.
Yeah.
What to do, what to think about it. It's a really tough thing, but I think there is a deep psychological trauma in the Western world at the moment.
Yeah. I completely agree, and I feel the same. So, over the last decade, I sold my business because, I was thinking, where is this artificial intelligence stuff going? I figured out my financial strategy, which involved Bitcoin, gold, hard assets. I knew that I could weather the storm. I knew how to beat it financially. And running a business wasn't part of that. And so immediately I was like, well, what do I do in this world now? Finances aren't going to be a problem for me. I think I've contingency planned for every scenario I could. I moved to an island, built the highest security structure I could build, look for countries that were not burdened by debt, look for community, look for how to live a more human life, touch grass.
Yeah.
That type of stuff. Explored more spiritual and religious beliefs, started to try and strengthen what are my beliefs around that. But the only thing I could find myself doing was what I'm doing here right now.
You want to tell other people?
I just want to share what I think I know, and maybe other people can contribute into furthering my understanding. And maybe I can help people. I don't need any money. I don't need you to buy anything. I don't need anything. And I'm blessed. And I don't think many people are in that situation. And it was Bitcoin that got me there.
Yeah. So I think I'm in a similar position.
Yeah.
So I found myself going more analog.
Yeah.
Cooking, meals. I go to the gym in the mornings. We play some tennis. I've started going back to physical books from audio books.
Yeah.
I'm finding that draw to the analog world.
Yeah.
Which I think it's really good. I like it.
Yes.
My big issue is, what do you do if you're not in that position, which is the large majority of the population?
Yeah, that's my fear. And that's where I think, again, I'm quite black-pilled as well. So I used to be very optimistic. Like when I was running a business, you've got to be deluded. Like you can't even survive in business unless you're deluded. Like you got to believe that you can achieve way more than you can actually achieve, and that's what makes your business successful. But what do you do when you lose that? Because I feel like there is an amazing opportunity in terms of all this AI stuff, but I don't know how you monetize anymore. I feel like everything's moving to free. And when everything's moving to free, that's incredibly disruptive. So I spend my time doing free stuff, and I'm able to do that. But what do you do if you're not there yet? Well, firstly, regardless, you still need a 10-year plan to figure out how to beat inflation and survive in a multipolar world. And the only thing I know about that is hard assets, physical assets. The next crisis is a self-custody play, definitely. Custodians versus self-custody. That's what goes wrong. There's many different theories on that. The only strategy is the big print in the West. Larry Lepard wrote a book on that. Like, yeah, there'll be a bigger print than COVID. It's the only strategy. There's no other thing. There's no way around that. And everyone needs to just understand that fixed assets is the way to solve that. And we enter into a world where your government might confiscate your assets, or they might tax your assets in order to stop you from leaving. And so everyone just needs to work on the sovereign side. That's solvable. And you need a 10-year plan to do that, and you need to start today. Don't say it's too late. It's not too late. You need 10 years to really plan for that. I ended up selling all of my investments that involved other people because I just stopped trusting people. Every investment, as a shareholder in about 100 different Bitcoin companies, every single one of them let me down. I got scammed everywhere. Everything that could go wrong went wrong, but many of those investments did well. So I just started saying I don't trust people.
So you don't invest in other people's companies, say as an angel, but would you invest in equities?
I don't do it anymore.
You don't do that anymore?
Don't touch it.
So everything should be in hard assets, like some form of money.
I've got to separate. I'm an ideological investor, so I may make wrong decisions, but I want to do it for ideological reasons. And so, which is a bad way of being an investor, by the way. Like the best way is to be like them, like the FIC.
Yeah, but hold on. I think you are investing, but you're investing in time.
Absolutely. That's correct. So I'm investing time in sharing information with no agenda.
Sorry. I think you're investing in protecting your future time. That's what I think you're doing, because I think about this a lot now. I'm 47. So at 20, it's like, how can I make as much money as possible and have a cool career? At 47, with less time, I'm like, how do I ensure I don't ever have to get in that position where I need a fucking job?
Yeah.
And it's investing in protecting time, and not just my kids. I think about longevity. How can I survive in this system? I think that's what you're investing in.
It's from we're going through a very similar journey. So I'm trying to get back to a more humane state of being, which involves caring about family. It involves, not work-life balance. It involves actually remembering what we're brought on this earth to do. And that's the journey I'm going through at the moment. And so, it's buying back time. Now, every private equity investment I have steals my time because I got to deal with the board issue. I got to sign agreements and contracts. I got to deal with someone that might go rogue. I've got to deal with regulations, money laundering, all of those things that still stole my time when I thought I was just making an investment. When you have counterparty risk, you have a theft of your time. Because I get back to, I could invest in your company, or I could just have some Bitcoin in self-custody or some gold bars. And gold bars don't give me grief. Bitcoin in self-custody doesn't give me grief. You give me lots of shit and make me attend board meetings and do stuff that steals my time. So I immediately said about it. Now, do I want to then invest in stocks? Well, no, I don't want to invest in McFick and Tick. That's terrorism. So
that's a different point.
Yeah.
So that's an exit the system thing.
Exit the system, yeah. So then I don't want to help BlackRock manage my assets. I don't want to invest in the S&P 500 so that the FIT can get wealthy with my money.
You're fully withdrawing.
Fully withdrawing.
Fully withdrawing because interesting, because I still hold some equity positions. Not many.
Yeah.
But you're part of the system if you do. You're supporting Make, Fick, and Tick.
Yeah, and if I receive yield, then I'm part of the problem. So, again, I don't judge anyone that does this because you've got to look after yourself. But and reality kicks in, right?
But the Nazis were just doing their job.
Yeah, exactly.
If you understand it and you know it's evil, yet you hold on to those equities, you're complicit.
Yeah. So I don't trade. I don't invest in financial weapons of mass destruction. I don't invest in index. I don't invest in stocks, bonds. If I'm going to invest, it's because somebody came to me and said, "Hey, I want an opportunity to create a fish and chip shop,
Yeah.
and I want to do it, and I want to help the community.
I want to build a farm
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
put food in the community. I want to create a new school system which is outside of the government school system. You're on about real stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
I want to help people build communities, because that's where that's how everyone survives. They survive in the real world. And the real world is you, your family, and your neighbors.
It's a place of privilege that becomes a burden.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand it. Talk to me about, because I'm feeling real draw to religion at the moment. I'm real draw. I haven't read the Bible. I am a Catholic, but I'm not practicing. But I keep seeing these little signals that draw me to it. So the other day, I had Netflix on. I was flicking, and up popped Noah, the Darren Aronofsky film. Have you seen it?
No.
So it's really interesting because it starts with the story of Cain and Abel, and how Cain killed Abel, and it talks about Cain created the city, and the city created industry, and it started growing really quickly. And then obviously all the bullshit that comes with that, and it was, there's like a darkness that came on the world because of all the incentives based on this. And I was watching that, and then obviously Noah's the son of the other brother of Cain and Abel, and he goes to build the ark because God's going to flood the earth to teach us all a lesson. But when it shows this industry growing around the world, I was like, oh, it's just telling us the story now. And it blows my mind how many of the stories of the Bible are telling you what is happening now. But these were written thousands of years ago. How did they know? Where's the foresight come from? And not that I feel a connection to God or Jesus. I'm amazed by these stories and what they're telling us, and I feel a real draw to it. And if I ignore it, I'm being complicit in the problems of this world. I'm biting the apple.
Yeah. I do see people going in two directions. They're either saying everything's a lie, and therefore all of that was a lie, which all religions and all religious scriptures, from my opinion, with the exception of one, was doctored. And
what's the exception?
The Quran is the only one that's preserved if you believe that it was a divine message, because it was not the human written books like the hadiths, but the actual one that was preserved from the moment it was actually revealed to Prophet Muhammad. That's the only every religion agrees that that's the only one that was preserved, and everything else was doctored for political reasons, including all the scripture that sits around institutional Islam, institutional Christianity, and institutional Judaism.
What's your interpretation of that then?
I believe that everyone, again, I don't want to preach here, but when I read the Quran from the perspective of the first time I read it was because I wanted to understand Islamic finance from first principles. I saw a book that where everything makes sense. Everything makes sense. And I saw so many lies told about things because they took other scriptures and said it's in the Quran when it's not. And so I was very curious around why it's the most lied about book in the world. And so that sparked my curiosity. So then I read it not from the perspective of trying to understand first principles of sustainable finance and Islamic finance. I read it from the perspective of believing there is a creator, and was this preserved divine guidance? And even if you believe that or not, if you read it from that perspective, I think you'll find the most sustainable guidance for humankind that exists in the world today.
In Islam?
In not institutional Islam, in the Quran.
Okay.
The Quran is preserved scripture. Islam has thousands of scriptures like hadiths that were later documented scriptures, from those that were around the Prophet and various other things. The Quran as one book, I personally recommend everyone read it from the perspective of thinking about everything that's happening today. Forget about all the perceptions Read it from the perspective: is this a sustainable map for the world? And if I did this, would it work? When I read it from that, I decided that the Quran is a truthful scripture.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's there's a reason why many people want to obfuscate it with mistruths and other things, like saying that what they're doing in Iran is Islam. No, these are political. This is institutional. And that's got nothing to do with believing there's a creator, and was this message from that creator, and was it preserved? I think everyone should read it from that perspective. And then you understand, it's really easy to understand the Bible and the Torah when you've read the Quran. But most people never go there because they've been told it's something that it's not. That was my journey. I respect all religions. Anything that makes you more spiritual, anything that brings you, closer to a creator. But I do think that humans need guidance. I don't think we come to... it's like I respect governance. Like, the reason that I tried to figure out how power works in the world and how world works is because I wanted to understand governance. The reason I like Bitcoin is because I understood it was governed in a trustless network. When I tried to understand banking governance, when I was a business, it was chaos until there was governance. Once we were regulated, there's accountability and governance. When I tried to understand how money works, you look at where's the accountability, how's it governed? Oh, right, people borrow it and it creates new money. And then that's why I was very drawn to Bitcoin, because it was a governance structure that no one could change. And it's accountable, to node operators, miners, and code, mass and code. And that made sense to me. I personally believe as humans, we need guidance because if I were left to my own devices, because I run a regulated financial institution, left to my own devices, I would have made the decisions that you're not allowed to do by being, because you're regulated. And so I think everyone needs accountability. Everyone needs to know what wrong and right is. And it's not like you need to know the boundaries of acceptable human behavior. I've been through a phase where I was doing very unacceptable human behavior. And now I think I understand the rules of what acceptable human behavior is. And I think that came from following rules and being accountable to it.
So do you believe there is a creator?
Yes.
You do?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah. I didn't. I do today.
Do you define it around some kind of religion, or is it just your own personal?
Yeah, I follow the Quran.
Okay.
I don't. I have big problems with institutional Islam and the scriptures around it. But I do believe that there is a creator, and the Quran was divine, and it gives you the outline. There's also mistranslations of the Quran, so when you go into the Arabic to English, you realize all the games that were played as well. You realize that it actually, I studied from somebody that actually looked at the original ancient Arabic language and what it meant at the time versus the English translations we have today. And you realize it's actually, there are some errors in the English translation understanding that is mainstream today. So I spent several years on that journey, and it gives me a lot of guidance, a lot of help, and I think it makes me a better human.
Well, what version is that you can? How does somebody else?
I study various scholars, and I started supporting projects of people that were going back to the original translations and creating new different types of translations based upon the 10, 15 things which are debatable in English translation. And so that's the type of thing I invest in. I invested in somebody that wanted to do that because I want to see that project come to life. That's what I invest in today.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So do you consider yourself a Muslim?
Yeah, I'd call myself a Muslim, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
There's a lot
there's many misperceptions about what being a Muslim actually means as well. Being a Muslim, based upon translations of ancient Arabic, was actually a peacemaker. And being an imam was about being a protector and a security to peace. Now, institutional Islam has told you many different things. Why? Because they became connected to power struggles and political movements and follow the money. And then you find out how these different types of beliefs came to be. But there was a lot of work done by Sufi Muslims, which is the more taking the Quran and figuring out the more spiritual aspect of your connection to God, and more of the Sufi work.
I was going to say, so where do you connect with Muslims who have a similar interpretation?
Actually, online. I don't.
There's no nation state that is.
No. Nation. As soon as you get involved in nation state, you are involved in geopolitics and negotiating with the thick, mick, and tick. And to me, nation state is a complete obfuscation between you and God. And so I'm not patriotic to a country. I want my country to be a great place for people to do. I don't want degenerate gamblers. I don't want people addicted to pornography. I don't want people on drug addictions and alcohol addictions. I want people that actually care about each other, that contribute to each other. All of that guidance is there, and it's all sustainable. Intercourses within the realms of a protected marriage. These types of things. These are all sustainable things. These all make a lot of sense. But once you add nation state, once you add corporate, once you add the need for funding in order to fund a temple or a mosque, you then end up in politics. And politics is when, that's the challenge. For me, the spiritual battle is seeing through the politics, and life is a test. And our job is to continually seek knowledge so that we can, life is a test. And that's why I stopped being addicted to the world has to be fixed. I realized actually the world doesn't have to be fixed. The world is broken by design because bad shit happens and you go down two paths. You either do more bad shit or you actually do better stuff. And that's what life is about. Do you, in those moments, take the easy bad path, or do you take the better path? And there's no perfection. Perfection is a false thing. It's we will meet our creator, and you will look at all the actions that you did when you were faced with really bad things. Did you make more bad decisions or more good decisions? And that's my accountability.
I didn't think we would get here.
I know.
Today. I really didn't. But I'm so open-minded to religion. Like I said, I was raised a Catholic, but I don't feel a connection to the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
But I definitely feel a draw. I've been feeling the draw to Christianity, but I think it's more of a draw to religion and guidance.
And principles.
Yeah, principles. We talk about this a lot. It's like, even if you just look at the, even as you as a Muslim, but if you look at the Christian teachings, how many times each day does each human within the UK who is a Christian, how many times do they essentially sin? And what is the compound interest of that to the psyche, the happiness of the country, to the success of the country? And I think we're so far away from this now as a nation, as a planet, as a group of people. I feel like we're entering, I don't know, these dark times because of this, because we don't have that guidance, that guiding light, that thing that grounds us every day. And that's what I like about what I think are like really spiritual religious people, not your clerics and your priests and your theatrical religious people. It's just the people who are deeply connected spiritually. I think we just need more of this.
Yeah, I believe there's many paths, and I do think you're right. So for me, the journey was understanding usury,
There you
and
go.
then that took me to monetary reform, Bitcoin, Islamic finance, and then I've found my journey of what's the problem in the world. Well, it's usury, degeneracy, and all of these things, and it took me back to that type of scripture. I do think in terms of nation state level, GDP is an incredibly damaging marker for a country. The Kingdom of Bhutan did the Gross Happiness Index, and it looked at, are people happy? Are people committing suicide? Are people, having addictions? Are they engaging in antisocial behavior? Are people, what's wealth inequality? What's their level of happiness in general? And I think the biggest problem is that GDP obfuscates the reality of wealth inequality. And so GDP with a debt-based Ponzi scheme that we've covered, where usury is embedded into the monetary system and you can't avoid it, that leads to an environment where the majority are unhappy and a few are very unhappy because they own everything and they realize that they have to engage in activities that are so inhumane in order to maintain their power. And those at the top of the cycle, I don't believe they're happy. I don't know how you can watch children in Iran and the genocide in Gaza and October the 7th and know that you're making money from that and not have a severe bankruptcy and coping mechanism that you've developed inside you that's made you seriously
or you're a psychopath.
Yeah.
No, I don't understand it at all.
Yeah.
I don't understand a lot.
Yeah.
The older I get, the less I understand. But I think one thing I've come to understand is that happiness is quite simple. Once you stop chasing that false god of money, and maybe that comes from a place of privilege, but I think simple things can keep you happy.
Yeah. I think we were brainwashed a lot. And I think the depression that we're experiencing as a society is that we thought we were doing everything to a very high ethical standard, that we were helping civilize the world, that there was an element of supremacy, I think, in our ideology. And now we're finding out that it was all a lie, and we were doing the opposite of what we thought we were doing. And I think that creates a problem. And I think it's also being weaponized deliberately, because they're trying to build a control grid. And what do you need in a control grid? You need weak people that are psychologically disengaged from the system, that are stuck in their house and don't want to leave their house, that are doom scrolling on technology all day, and their full dependencies financially, and they're worshipping idols of what does Tucker Carlson say in order to figure out what their thoughts are, and they're subordinate to a usurious system that has put them in such a financial position where they can't even maintain a marriage right now because they feel like such a loser. And the fabric of the role of the man and the woman is just hitting a point where women and men hate each other.
Yeah. We've scaled technology faster than we scaled wisdom. And I think this is a grave danger to society. We're not wise. And there's so many of the books I'm reading right now are books that were written over a century ago. There's a lot of wisdom in these books, and we're not teaching it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I consider the kid doom scroll. I saw a thing on Twitter the other day. It was great. Some young kid, he was about 16 and can't even remember the book he'd read, but let's just say it was something like, I don't know, The Odyssey. And he's gone online to talk about this book he's read, and there's apparently a movement behind that. And I thought, this is amazing. We've got kids doom scrolling bullshit on TikTok and Instagram. I wish they were reading, I don't know, Adam Smith or reading the Odyssey, the Iliad, the Aeneid, or
Even Adam Smith, that was a lie.
Well, he stole a lot of his ideas, didn't he?
Well, you had the Golden Age of Islam and the Dark Ages in Europe. It was the Islam was taking all of the Greek literature, like the philosophy. It was preserving and it was documenting everything. It created economics, which was free trade, hard money, and ethics was the part that they took out. So free trade, hard money, and a concept of what ethics are, what's good and bad trade. And what did they do? And then Adam Smith wrote The Invisible Hand to portray the market, but that was originally divine. That was a concept of good and bad in trade. And so he said the market is the God. And so everyone started worshipping the markets rather than a concept of free trade and hard money. And what else? What was the very first thing that was done? Well, Adam Smith was on the £20 notes at the Bank of England, his face, because this was part of the justification for worshipping markets in a debt-based Ponzi scheme.
Simon, every time I think I get somewhere in life, I sit down and talk to you and realize, fuck, I've got further to go. Have you faced any challenges with your kind of worldview? Like people seeing your worldview? I do like what I'm wondering is, people going to watch this as Simon's back. Great, listen to him. They're going to get to like the last 25%, and suddenly we're talking about religion, and we're going to talk about the Quran, and we're going to talk about that you're a Muslim, and suddenly there's a rejection.
Yeah.
That is a thing you have faced.
Oh, absolutely. Being a Muslim in the West as a white British guy is incredibly unpopular. But I am who I am and I don't care.
Yeah.
They'll say everything you just said is because you hate the West and you're the propaganda campaign that was put on top of Islam was, it was unbelievable in order to take down those towers and blow up Muslims in the Middle East. And that was a very powerful campaign. And it was only until the genocide happened that people started to question that narrative. And now they're realizing that we're ruled by the Epstein class.
I mean, I hate everyone. Yeah. I like you and I like Hayden and Connor, but I pretty much hate everyone and don't trust anyone anymore.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't care. I'm at a stage in life where I can talk truth as I see it, and probably most of it's wrong, but I think I've been pretty accurate at trying to get things right, and I think I've navigated life quite well. And I've made every mistake under the sun. I've done everything. I've messed up so many things that I know quite a lot about how to not mess things up. And I did a lot, I did the corporate career. I did the university thing.
Everything you're told you're meant to do.
Yeah. I did the charity thing. I did the not-for-profit thing. I did the business thing. I did the investing thing. I did I've been through that whole journey. And now I'm at a stage in life where I don't optimize based upon money, because I was given a gift.
You've controlled your ADHD.
But I am different as a human. Like the technology is definitely changing my brain. I wake up in the morning often with I'm not quite sure what I'm meant to be doing today.
I think that's a privilege.
Well, I never had that before. Every day I woke up and I knew that I was chasing something and I was working towards something.
Is that true though?
Maybe.
Because I think when you're chasing something, you're running away from something.
That's true. Because I was the obsessed business person that neglected my family, neglected everything, neglected my health.
Yep. Same.
And now I'm not that person. Well, I still have a tendency to just obsess, and now my whole thing is trying to figure out how the world works, and that leads me to study obsessively the same way I used to act in business or everything.
We're a similar age.
Yeah.
Don't say your age,
Yeah.
but I'm late 70s born, so we're similar-ish age, I think.
Yeah, I'm 80s.
You're okay,
Right. 1980. So.
You're not late 80s.
No.
So I'm a couple of years older. It's
What's
similar.
1980? That's right between X and or something. I can't.
I think you're X.
Yeah.
I'm X, but close to the boomers.
Yeah.
But it's basically saying everything I've been saying recently, right? Maybe this is the Gen X midlife crisis.
Yeah.
But,
well, we remember what it's like to write on pen and paper at school, and then we knew what it was like to print slides from a computer and put them in a binder, and then we knew what it was like when everything was a computer, and now we know what it's like when everything's a phone, and now AI is doing everything for us. Like, we've been through all of that.
well, so we used to know what it's like when you had to go and meet somebody, you had to turn up on time because you couldn't phone them.
Yeah.
If you weren't there, like there'd be a problem. And
Yeah.
we remember encyclopedias, and I saw God, watch this. I think it's like kind of AI slop, but I saw this thing this morning. Did I send it to you, Con?
I remember when I was able to manage my emails, my inbox.
I sent this thing to me and my kids have got a WhatsApp group. I sent them this video. I think it's AI, but it's kind of interesting. You don't need to play the whole thing, Con, but just play the start. Because it made me feel sad, but I know with Connor, he is drawn to what this stuff is telling. He always says he's jealous of what we had.
Wait, so you're telling me in the future, people just stare at a little box all day, inside and outside?
And in the future, you don't even own the music, you just pay every month to borrow it? Like, if you stop paying, the music just disappears?
Wait, so before people eat, they take a picture of the food and show strangers? And the strangers like and comment on it? So in the future, everyone has their own phone and they use it to type messages instead of call? And if someone calls you without typing it first, it's considered rude? So you're telling me in the future, people just post their diary for everyone to see?
Some people get paid for it.
For their diary?
Keep going. There's one more. There's a really important
And in the future, a little box just tells you where to go, turn by turn, and people still get lost? If you want food from a restaurant, you just tap the box and a stranger brings it to your door, and you pay extra for that, and then you rate the stranger? Our moms always say don't talk to strangers. But in the future, everyone just talks to strangers all day on the little box and shows them their house and their kids? So in the future, nobody ever just sits with the quiet, like ever? That sounds really exhausting. In the future, everyone's connected to everything, and people are still lonely? Okay, but do we at least still stay outside until the streetlights come on?
I know it's probably AI, but it kind of hit hard, man, when I saw this, because my childhood was brilliant. I remember like 15 years old, every weekend, I couldn't wait to finish school, had my skateboard. There's a car park near us called Lurk Street. My friends would go and would skateboard for 2-3 hours. But I remember before that, I'd run around my mate's house, would get the football and go and play. Everything was like outside when we could. And now everything's kind of inside. It's really sad. Like, I wish I was ballsy enough to just get rid of this.
Yeah.
And get our family to get rid of this. I'm so close to it.
Yeah.
But
how do you function?
well, it's not that. It's not that. I actually don't fucking care anymore, Simon. But it's just a bit like all this technology is great. We can sit on a flying chair at 500 miles an hour and I can FaceTime somebody else on a flying chair. What incredible technology.
Yeah.
But the human experience is about connection to other people and community. Yeah, I love working with my son. It's the biggest gift in the world. Yeah, we wind each other up, but when we drive to London, we just talk for a couple of hours sometimes about the show. Like, we will talk about this tonight. And I just think, when you're chasing something, what are you running away from? And I think it's your ego telling you you're meant to go and get this thing, whilst you know internally what you're happy with is the connections you have and the people around you.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that's really happening right now is I'm losing the concept of time.
Yeah.
Like things are just speeding up, and I don't really know what time it is. Like I don't know whether it's morning, day, night. The last 2 weeks I actually didn't leave the house.
So I've had a different experience from that.
Yeah.
I felt like when I was chasing business, time was just flew by.
Yeah.
Now I started to switch off. I'm actually finding it slowing down a bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with that.
I mean, we've already done Q1 of 2026.
Well, we've already done 26 years of the century. And I remember exactly where I was at the millennium. I was at a rave. But
Millennium, I was in Chicago and somebody put a gun to my head.
What?
Yeah.
Jesus
on
Christ.
New Year's Eve in Chicago.
Yeah.
I didn't forget that one.
I was in...
Actually, it was my friend. It wasn't me, but we were together. And they put a gun to his head, and it was a real reality check.
Damn. I was at a rave in East London somewhere doing cocaine.
Yeah.
Thinking I was the shit.
Yeah.
I was a degenerate.
I was into the whole jungle drum and bass thing.
Yeah.
Going to One Nation and
One
all
Nation
that type of stuff.
Do you ever go to Jongleurs?
No.
King's
didn't
Cross.
listen.
Was that King's Cross? Jongleurs was wicked. And the one they had in Milton Keynes.
Yeah.
I remember the first one I went to and listened to Turbulence. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, man. Well, listen, I think you're right. The community thing, I think you're right. I think that's what we've got to get back to.
Yeah.
And disconnecting. I want to get rid of that motherfucker. Oh, another profound 2 hours with Simon Dixon.
Where are we going to be in 3 months?
Yeah, I have no idea.
Yeah.
I have no idea. But look, it sounds to me like the West is over.
Well, I think if you're staying in the West, you want to go a bit more rural. I do think you should consciously decide where you want to live. I think if you're privileged to be able to do that. I think have a 10-year plan, really. Everyone needs a 10-year plan, like to how to navigate this. Decide where you want to be. But I do believe that if you were incredibly wealthy in the West and you own assets, you'll probably be fine. But there's fewer and fewer people, and then you got to figure out what's going to happen to everyone else. I think that's UBI.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
Man, I'm going to go think about this one. Expect some texts from me over the next few days as I come to some profound realizations, and I'm sure we'll sit down in a few months and do this again.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me, Peter.
No, anytime. I far more enjoy the second half of the conversation, the more philosophical side. Yeah. All right, man. Well, listen, look, keep doing your thing. Stay safe. And, we love you and we want you here whenever you want to come in.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you, man. Thank you, everyone. Be safe.